How long can you sit on my neck? Husband freaked out. Why did she do it in the first place? I don't know. She wasn't old. She wasn't exactly a hag. Another thing is that he, her spoiled, crazy husband, needed a young one. The concept of young for Tom was clear. If a girl did not marry before 21 years old, then she is too old and something wrong with her. Don't ask me why 21st century medieval attitudes. It happens. And Kelly, 36, is a childless grandmother. It's like Tom's forgotten the time when he thought of his wife as his greatest treasure. Spoiled her, bought her everything she wanted, not even for her, but for him. Dragging her around the country from job to job. And then she became a suitcase without a handle. It happened without either of them noticing. She was 18 when they got married. He was 10 years older. She was pretty, in the style of actresses of the 50s, short stature, delicate face, big eyes. He's the most ordinary. You wouldn't immediately remember what he looked like unless they said his name. It seemed to Kelly that Tom had not just fallen in love with her, but clung to her like a tick. He couldn't let anyone else have her. After walking her home in the evening, he wouldn't dare leave the entrance for another hour or two until he saw the lights go out and the windows darken. Surely he was afraid that before Kelly went to bed, someone else might come in and take her away. There was no question about the seriousness of his intentions. He'd proposed to her within a week of meeting her. Tom cared less about the wedding itself, the restaurant, the guests, the honeymoon. Can we do it with or without him? All he cared about was getting married and taking Kelly with him. In the meantime, Tom had quit his job again and was moving up north. Kelly's father kept silent, only sighed, resigned to his fate. And her mother cried she didn't want her only daughter to go so far away. Kelly herself had no time to think about it. Registry office on a weekday, without any celebration. Some hastily organized home parties, and now the train. A rainy evening, and the carriage slowly begins to sail away from the platform. There in the new place, Tom rented a flat, waiting for the time when they would have their own. No carriages, dormitories, or the like that his new mates were content with. It wasn't so much that he was chasing comfort as he wanted to keep Kelly away from any encounters, even casual ones. She was to sit in that 9th floor flat like Rapunzel in the tower, seeing no one but her husband. When Tom was free, they'd go on nature trips. Kelly appreciated the beauty of the north, those pewter, brass, silver colors of the short summer, the still water mesmerizing. The rest of the time she was entertained by books. She'd signed up at the library. And serials, those endless ones where at the beginning of the series the characters start making themselves coffee and then finish the cup at the end. Serials that you could do all your housework to. Tom was a blob of energy, and that's what he took the others by. Charming seemed not at the expense of appearance or intelligence, but because of this vitality, which many lack. In certain cases, if there was no one brighter, he could become the soul of the company. He was always and everywhere regarded by his superiors as indispensable. He really was a jack of all trades. And when he got bored in one place and broke off to go to the other side of the country, it was always regretted by the bosses and those with whom Anatoly worked, and the women with whom he managed to get acquainted and who envied Kelly. "You're not a military man," Kelly said to her husband, "but I feel like an officer's wife always traveling over the road." Tom had always had money. He would never work for an idea. And now, to comfort and cheer up his wife, he floods her with presents. In the wardrobe, racks of dresses, blouses, and suits hung as tightly as if they were in a shop. Kelly could match the outfits with shoes of the right color. And the saying, "a well-to-do woman is one who doesn't wear ripped tights under her trousers," certainly applied to Kelly. He wouldn't let her work. It was out of the question. "We've got enough money," Tom said. "Nothing to go where you can find adventures on your tail." And he didn't want kids for a long time, maybe 10 years. Whether it was the settled, beautiful home life with quiet evenings, cleanliness and freedom to dispose of his time that was more precious to him, or whether he was subconsciously afraid that he would be jealous of Kelly, even of a child. When they finally settled down in a large regional city, their own flat was bought. Tom became a small boss. It turned out that Kelly could not get pregnant and give birth in any way. But this was not the main reason why her husband's attitude to her changed. She simply remained as she was, pretty, but no longer young. But young, quiet, not entering into arguments, and so predictable. He'd had enough of the bland. What did he want? The first time he said it was an accident. It wasn't worth mentioning. He forgot it immediately. "You're sitting on my neck." Kelly threw her head back. Her, That phrase clawed at her heart. Those words, casually dropped, are always the most sincere. Tom didn't pursue the subject. He was still putting together the wardrobe she'd bought, but his face was absent. In his thoughts, he lived somewhere else. It wasn't long before she realized he had another. He had a crush on a girl the same age Kelly had been when they met. The age difference seemed so vast to Kelly that a connection couldn't be in her mind. It would look both ridiculous and laughable. Naive Daisy. Tom's passion was named Jane, and she was the complete opposite of his wife. An athletic girl with long, strong runner's legs and hair dyed bright pink. And she had so many things, like intricate patterns on her long, sharp toenails, piercings in every possible place, intricate tattoos that Jane could be looked at for a long time, like a painting or a puzzle. However, Jane didn't make men puzzle for long. She gave up quickly, if the price was right. All this Kelly had learned in roundabout ways. The big city wasn't really that big. There was only one thing that bothered Tom, but it was the most important thing for her. Jane was not averse to making money wherever she had a chance. The concept of fidelity did not fit in the head of the pink Malvina. She was flying. You want to let her go and keep her at the same time. To let her go, so as not to suffer and not to be tormented by jealousy, to keep her, because without her, no way. Without Malvina, life seemed long, empty and boring, like a gray canvas that stretches to the horizon. His wife became annoying, because she was that very cloth-smooth, predictable, without a single bump. You could walk on it with your eyes closed and never stumble. Tom was tired even of Kelly's cuteness, which was beginning to show. If there was a reason to fight, a thunderstorm broke out. A consonant word for a tiff, they'd break everything that could be broken, from dishes to relationships. Maybe he'd feel better. But Kelly didn't go for the provocation. She stood over the cooker, slow-cooking borscht sacred. The smell of meat, garlic, parsley, and satiety. If satiety can have an odor. Even if you swear you eat such borscht and you feel happy. Tom overcame himself and decided to hurry things up. He had a wide circle of acquaintances, including a pimp. No, not the film boy who arrives in a nice car to herd girls on the red light street. Michael was a subtle personality. Either a pimp or a procurer. He could order a girl, a boy, a waistcoat to cry into all night. Michael was also a pro. He could unmistakably determine who was worth what, and who to offer whom. Sometimes he did things that were completely unexpected, but he was never wrong. He knew that this young blonde, with the appearance of a model, can get sick of his partner in an evening. But that woman over there, which seems to be nothing special, will be carried in his arms for a long time. Tom saw Michael several times a year in companies of a certain kind, and always by chance. The next meeting was just as casual, but suddenly Tom had a thought that struck him as brilliant. Maybe he'd just had too much to drink. "Listen, can't you put my wife on the case?" he said. Michael had seen a lot of things in his life, perhaps too much, but here he was dumbfounded. Yes, among his clientele were married women who sometimes wanted a thrill and who would not mind going left. Almost all of them wanted their cheating to remain a secret, except for one totally promiscuous couple who were looking for another equally promiscuous couple. Michael tried to advise the casual acquaintance to go wake up, but the same life experience told him that it would be a good idea to look at this spouse with his own eyes. You never know. They made an appointment. Tom didn't tell Kelly who Michael was. Maybe she wouldn't be right for him, and then they'd have to say goodbye to the tempting idea. He couldn't just leave Kelly at the railway station on a corner somewhere to find her own clients. It would be easier to just kick her out. Divorce her. Michael came to visit, as if he were just an acquaintance. Kelly served the men coffee. She baked a pie with apples and set the table, moving, as always, silently and without uttering unnecessary words. She tried not to interfere with the conversation, present but not involved and not noticing that Michael was watching her. Tom also cast glances at his wife, but not satisfied. Kelly had not dressed up as he had asked. She remained in a simple homemade dress, blue with a ruffle, her hair gathered in a ponytail. She was an actress. Now she was a Ryazan woman. Who needs such a woman? Every man's got one of those. Michael didn't stay long. Tom went out to escort him up the stairs. He was sure that Michael would reject the goods, but he said vaguely, "We'll see." And that was the end of it. 3 weeks later, he called out of the blue and asked Tom for Kelly's phone number. "What do you want?" Tom became wary. Michael was silent for a few moments. "I don't understand what this shifty man wants in the end. To compete with him. to sell his wife himself, flag in hand and a steamroller to go with it. But Michael indeed had an extraordinary case. So he clarified. I think your Kelly would be good for one person, for a conversation. What do you mean, a conversation? He has circumstances. I won't go into details, none of your business, sorry, but this man will be at the restaurant late tonight. He'll be drinking a lot, and he'll probably want someone to be there for him. You listen to what he says, or just keep silent with him. I answer with my head, no one will hurt your wife. Huh? Tom's got it. Then Kelly's fine. You know, when it comes to keeping quiet, she's the best. So give me her phone number, dummy. Because you and I are getting a film, the groom agrees, the relatives agree, and the bride has to be persuaded. In relations with women, if it was necessary, Michael knew how not to press, but to achieve his goal by persuasion found the way to the heart. Tom hesitated a moment, and the phone dictated. Later he would discuss these piquant details with Malvina, and she would complain that there would be no one to take pictures of the secret meeting. If there was dirt on anyone, she would be even more submissive. When he got the number he was looking for, the pimp called immediately. Kelly, he said, do you remember me? It's Michael, I was visiting you. I have a huge favor to ask of you, don't take it for granted. The woman didn't answer, but Michael realized she wasn't speaking because she was confused. Come to this restaurant tonight. I'll introduce you to a man who cannot be left alone. Believe me, it's very important. You'll save your soul. You should see a psychiatrist, Kelly said and hung up. Then she went about her usual business, and somewhere in the back of her mind, like a spring that had suddenly broken through, she was filled with the thought that it was not for nothing, that it was Tom who had thought up and organized everything. Both Michael and the meeting to which she had now been called. It made her want to cry. Kelly suddenly realized that she hadn't cried for a long, long time. Maybe she hadn't even learned how. You could shed tears if you felt sorry for yourself, but she was too tired to comfort herself. Tom didn't want to look ahead to see a routine life, an impending old age. Kelly was afraid to look back. She could see herself standing there in that kerchief, with the dust rag. The years were behind her when she'd gone from princess to Cinderella, and the prince had degenerated and wouldn't divorce her. Kelly felt like getting drunk. She called Michael back. Okay, I'll go, she said. It was a hotel restaurant, fancy and so expensive that Kelly was embarrassed to even walk past it. The carpeting there was already outside, and there were vases of orchids at the entrance. Kelly hadn't bought clothes in a long time. She'd stayed in that other life, with her husband blowing dust off her. And now Kelly didn't know what to wear. If all she had to do was talk, this dark blue jacket would do. She could match it with the pale blue silk dress she had once loved so much. The silk was real, delicate, not weighty. But there was hardly any cosmetics at home, and perfume only Grasshopper Bridge, with its heavy, clingy odor. Kelly was ready for Michael to send her back, to call some young girl for his client. She was even more embarrassed that she had come first. She walked around the entrance for a while, hesitant to stop lest she be chased away. There must be someone like a doorman. He'd be out in a minute. Why are you standing here? You can't linger here. A black car pulled up. Very inconspicuous, Michael the pimp didn't like too much attention. He got out with the businesslike look of a man who comes to this hotel almost every day. He recognized Kelly immediately. He nodded, didn't say anything about her appearance, but as if he was grateful that she had agreed to this venture at all, and was standing here in person, not late. He took her politely under the elbow, and they went inside. The restaurant was in a semi-basement. Kelly was far from all that. She was much more comfortable with unsophisticated dumplings and pie shops. She would have felt out of place, even if she'd just come here with friends. Now she was tense, looking around, even though she didn't know who was waiting for her. Michael knew. The dim lights, the heavy wooden tables, the bar. For some reason it all reminded Kelly of an old sailing ship, a caravel being carried along by the waves of life. Michael took Kelly to the corner farthest from the entrance, the one with the least light. Here sat the man they needed, or who needed them. A dark-haired, middle-aged man with a thin, nervous face. Kelly noticed there was a hat lying next to him. Who wore hats nowadays? The glass of wine was almost finished. Miss Kelly introduced Michael's companion, and Kelly threw him a surprised look. How did he know her middle name? She'll sit with you as long as you want. Michael understood, but he didn't answer her question. He'll give the name himself if he wants to. Well, I'll leave you to it. The man nodded carelessly. He was immersed in his own thoughts. Another similar nod to Kelly for her to sit down. She sat down with a straight back. There were hardly any customers in the restaurant. Only at one other table, a group of men engrossed in conversation. A young bartender behind the counter, in a white shirt and black waistcoat, and a waitress who approached them almost immediately. A dyed blonde in her mid-40s. She had a tired look. Order whatever you want. The man said to Kelly, nodding at the menu. What food could she think of right now? She was feverish with excitement. A glance at her was enough to realize that. Bring us some for now. Kelly didn't know what the mysterious-sounding words meant, but she guessed they meant wine or something stronger, and an appetizer of some kind. There was silence in the air as they waited for the waitress. What should I call you anyway? Kelly asked. And after a while, are you sick? He was definitely awake. There was confusion in his voice. What makes you think that? She shrugged her shoulders. Nothing else occurred to me. Only that you have learnt that you are ill with some terrible, hopeless disease and have no one to talk to. And I'm now a traveling companion who won't see you tomorrow, so it's okay. You will indeed, one of these days, hear of my death, he said tiredly and calmly, as if it were a done deal. But it is of no consequence. He took her hand, but there was nothing sensual in the movement, nothing of the kind. He held her wrist. Here you are, you need to check your heart. Remind me when you leave. I'll text you the number and you call. You're a doctor. She suddenly remembered him. Yes, he was a doctor, a very famous one. The kind of doctor they always say was from God, from God. She remembered his name, James, but his middle name was lost somewhere. Then I realized. What do you want to put your hands on yourself? Others will do it for me. But how? Are you being threatened? She didn't understand. Maybe some crazy patients he didn't cure. You can't save everyone. But if you know, why don't you leave? Why don't you run away from them? They'll get you everywhere. There's nothing you can do about it. But I can still live today. There was a momentary flash of rage in his voice. Exactly. He tried to argue with fate for a moment. The waitress brought the wine. James signaled for her to leave. She came back with another tray, set out the plates of appetizers, and finally left them alone. What do they want with you? Kelly asked. What for anyway? He was silent for a moment, then said, as if he hadn't heard her, as if he were talking to himself. I've had quite a lot of time, after all. Life could have been shorter and much more precious, so there's not much to repent or regret. But behind it all was a little boy who was desperately scared. And Kelly realized that. She touched his hand too, but not in the way he had done before. She just covered his hand with hers, letting him know that she felt his fear, and she felt sorry for him. Do you have anyone? Kelly asked, and anticipating that he wouldn't understand her question or would misunderstand it, she clarified, my mom, my sister, someone in the family. Can't you go to them? He shook his head. I have relatives, but they are far away in Siberia. We haven't been in touch for a long time. It's just that life has separated us. But I wouldn't go to them anyway. You can't set them up. She took a few sips of this insanely expensive wine, which didn't seem to taste like anything special, but it made her head swim gently. And despite the oddly tragic note of the conversation, a sense of flight and recklessness came. It's a good thing you have someone at all, she said. I miss it all so much now, my childhood, my grandmother, whom I would hug now, her old house. It's a former merchant's house. It had such thick walls, such wide windowsills, and many, many geraniums. I even remember the feeling of it sitting on the windowsill, knees tucked up, a ray of sunlight falling on your face so that you squeeze your eyes shut, and the smell of geraniums. Everything was so safe and solid then, and it seemed like it would always be that way. Kelly noticed that the memories of his childhood seemed to bring him out of his stupor from the world where he was now. James was distracted, herself, in her most difficult, infinitely difficult moments. It had been a lifesaver. Thinking back to the distant years was like diving to great depths. Everything appears a little unreal, a little blurred. It makes my ears pop, but the rest of what I want to think about ceases to exist. So they sat there, reminiscing about their childhood, each of them his own. It didn't matter how interesting and coherent the story turned out to be. What mattered was that you wrap yourself in that memory like a warm blanket. James was talking about a stream that ran through the park in their town, which went into a mysterious black pipe to make films, that's all, and then flowed into a pond, where in summer the boys caught small fish, the size of a little finger, and in winter they skated. And you could clear the snow with a mitten, look through the ice, as if into an aquarium at the algae, at the green beads of cassava, at the still frog, which also looked at you eye to eye. "Come on, I'll walk you back to your room," Kelly said at last. The hour was such that it was time for the restaurant to close as well. She could sense from herself that it would be hard for her to stand on her feet. And how would he feel? He'd started drinking before she got there. But if they leaned on each other, they'd make it. He remembered his number was 211. But when they stopped in front of the door, he gave the key to Kelly, not sure he could get into the keyhole. There were mirrors and orchids in here too. Orchid pots were everywhere in this hotel, and there was glass and metal all around, also shiny, cold, reflecting you 1,333 times. James put his arm around Kelly and stood, swaying slightly. She was precisely the one person he was related to that was so hard for him to tear himself away from. An inexplicable feeling came over her as she pressed herself against his chest. They just stood there, neither moving. And still, just yesterday, Kelly wouldn't have imagined for herself that such a thing was possible. She was reminded of the boy Ben she'd known since she was a little girl. He lived in their backyard. Only she'd been very young then, about 4 or 5 years old, and he was already graduating from high school. A handsome red-haired boy, her first love, which she hid from everyone, even from her mum. Then they saw each other many years later. He became a helicopter pilot, went to Afghanistan, fought in battles, got married. His Mia was a very sick person, a severe diabetic, and everything was repeatedly complicated by her carelessness. She could forget to give an injection on time, and he trembled when he rushed home after work. What would he catch? Would everything be safe there? He didn't look like his old self anymore, heavy, gray-haired. But Kelly had a wonderful feeling every time she found herself in his company. The cliched expression, like being behind a stone wall, was the most accurate. Protection, calmness, confidence in her own safety, and the fact that he would not let anything bad happen would shield her from everything. Of course, they remembered each other, talked about their childhood. And Kelly admitted to no one that she often envied Mia's diabetes. And now James was the second one to come her way. It couldn't be explained in words. He was in some desperate bind from which he saw no hope of getting out, and she was beside him, feeling the peace she'd only had as a child, and she couldn't find the strength to pull away, to say goodbye, to walk away. It was the one moment of her life that if you didn't appreciate, if you didn't give up everything else for it, you'd always regret missing. Kelly closed her eyes and took a short, convulsive breath. In the morning, she started to hurriedly pack, but he told her, "Kelly, sit down." His tone was different now, as if the momentary weakness he had allowed himself yesterday had passed. Now he spoke to her as an elder, as one to be obeyed. "What I'm going to tell you now, you must listen calmly." Kelly sat down. She didn't look at James, averting her eyes. This night felt like it had been stolen from her. She didn't feel worthy of this man. What had Tom insinuated to her over the past few years aged, faded, bland, unwanted? There's no such thing as an unattractive woman. There's no such thing as too little vodka. Well, last night's wine had been enough to make her pass for a sensual beauty. But it's daytime, sunshine in her wrinkled, unmade face. "I'll give you some money," James said. And before she could take offense and resent that it was payment for the night, he continued. "You're going to have to change your life very soon. You're going to have to do it. Believe me, I know. If I turn out to be wrong, you can toss that money in the Mississippi, give it to charity. But I'm giving it to you now so that when the time comes, you can walk away and start over. Do you understand me?" She didn't realize how much money he was talking about until he opened her purse and dropped in 3 wads of $5,000 banknotes in a banker's girdle. Kelly gasped, "Are you crazy? I'm not taking it for anything." "Luba, I don't need that money anymore," he said, separating each word from the other. "That's what I wanted somewhere in some fund. You can do it for me later." But she was so shocked by what was happening that she let the words pass her ears. "Will you give me your phone number?" she asked as she walked away, resigned to the weight of her purse. Sure, he dictated the number. Have you calmed down? His face didn't flinch. Yes. Will I see you again? He pulled her to him again and stroked her hair for a long time. And now she was sure that even if they never met again, this bond would remain between them forever. The house was empty, Tom at work, the usual mess that reigned whenever her husband stayed home for even a few hours without her. The dirty dishes in the kitchen. Kelly walked slowly through her flat, as if it were someone else's. Would Tom ask her when he returned if she'd had anything with this stranger from the hotel, or just a conversation, as the pimp had promised? And probably her husband had arranged with the lawyer for some sum of money to be received for her. In the evening, Tom asked no questions. He took the lid off the pot and inhaled the smell of chicken soup with a look of bliss on his face. Pouring himself a deep bowl, still steaming, he sat down and began to eat. Kelly walked out of the kitchen. Another day passed, another. James didn't call her, nor did she call him. But Kelly had no doubt he would make himself known. People like that don't lie, don't dodge, don't disappear, don't sneak out of other people's lives in haste like thieves. On Saturday, before having coffee, Tom went down to the ground floor and picked up the mail. Yes, they still subscribed to a few newspapers, and, for Kelly, an indoor plant magazine in Archaism, but there it was. Kelly herself didn't know why she picked up the local paper, unfolded it, and saw his portrait. A famous doctor. Tragic death. Burnt body found in the woods. All his regalia was listed born. Graduated from the institute, worked, taught. The funeral will be today. They say fainting can be avoided. Kelly remembered something like that. It is only in films and books heroines beautifully and smoothly sink to the floor, and the heroes rush to bring their feelings. Kelly's friend had fainted once in a very unfortunate way. She had fallen and knocked out her front teeth. Kelly herself was now dizzy and a black veil was thickening in front of her eyes. She fumbled for a trestle, sat down and just breathed deeply for a while, concentrating on that. When she felt better and realized she could stand up, Kelly said to her husband, "I need to go to the funeral." She couldn't see his face, but she could clearly picture the way he raised his eyebrows. "Whose are these? Do you know him?" She couldn't remember if she had a black dress. What did it matter, though? James was being buried from that farewell hall in the medical center. Kelly had never seen so many people come before, and she never would again. The small hall couldn't hold everyone, and people were standing outside. Someone tried to go inside, but a young woman wearing a mourning bandage on her head came out. She was tall, not grief in her eyes, but defiance, a desire to stand up for herself. "Wait here. There's no room for relatives there, it's stuffy. What do you care? The coffin is closed anyway." Someone whispered that it was Alicia, the seventh water on the Sour Patch, the sister-in-law of a cousin, and sighed disapprovingly. Why hurt people? It's a common grief, and indeed crying without hiding. Very young girls crying old people. These were James's former patients. Those whom he saved pulled out, came out. A unique, absolutely unique doctor. There would be no more like him. He could see right through a person, look at them, touch them, and realize what had happened to you. And they'll never find the people who killed him. That's how it always happens. If such a unique person is taken away from us, no one will be responsible. When the crowd began to move, and they carried wreaths and heavy lacquered coffin, when they started to get into buses, there were not enough standing places. And there was a cavalcade of cars and young guys on motorbikes, bikers. They were patients, too. Kelly didn't even try to join anyone, to ask to get into a car, to squeeze onto a bus, to stand on the steps. She leaned against a birch tree and cried, covering her face with her hands. She cried even after everyone had left. It was somehow unnoticeable. Kelly spoke to Tom now as if he were a stranger. Everyone lived their own lives, and in the evenings Kelly sat in the rocking chair by the window for a long time. She had her knitting on her lap, but she did not touch the needles and was deep in thought. About 3 weeks later, Tom said to her, "I found you another client." Kelly didn't immediately realize what he was saying. She looked at her husband exactly as he said the phrase in a language she didn't know. "Well, they gave me such good money for you that time," he explained. "Now Michael is offering more." Yeah, Kelly said automatically. James knew everything in advance. "You'll see I'm right." Kelly found nothing better than to hide the money he gave her inside the piano. There they waited for their time, and it had come. Now it had to be decided where to go. Pack her things and disappear from the house right after her husband left for work, so he'd keep her out of her hair longer. No, of course she'd leave him a note, explain that he didn't need to look for her. Maybe he'd even be glad, and a pink Malvina would take up residence in their flat tomorrow. Kelly didn't care about that. She knew she wouldn't go to her parents' house, because there, if her husband wanted to look for her, he'd find her immediately. And she needed to get away from everyone and start, as James had told her to do, with a clean slate. She was sure he could see everything that was going on from there, knew she was pregnant too. It was a gamble, of course, with the money that had fallen on her from the sky, or rather had been shoved into her bag. Kelly had bought a modest house in the countryside rather than a luxurious city flat, which would have sufficed for her. She put the rest of the money into an account. She wanted silence, the silence from Voznesensky's poems. I want silence, silence. Are my nerves burned? Silence. So that the shadow of the pine tree, tickling us, shifting, chilling us like a prank, along our backs to the little toes of our feet, of silence. The man who had sold her house was overjoyed. Some years ago he had built this little house for his old mother, to replace the wooden hut that had promised her. One room, a kitchen and facilities in a small cubbyhole at the end of the corridor. What else do you need to live? But the mother had already turned 95, and even in this house box she could no longer live alone. Her son took her to his house. The house, painted for some reason in the color of sea waves, remained an orphan, for country roads for country dwellers cramped, but Kelly just right. She arrived with only one bag, and at first she was afraid if someone came to the wicket, looking out from behind the curtain, trying to see who needed it. But Tom didn't look for her. He rang once. Kelly's heart snapped when she saw who the call was from, but all he asked was, "You're not coming back?" "No." "Are you paunchy or something?" He guessed. "Not your concern. And the baby's not yours." "Indeed, it's not mine, at least begging with this child, if you're so stupid." "What's it to me?" "That's what I called to say I've changed the locks in the flat, so I can't come and take out whatever you want. And Jane's home most of the day." Anyone else would have wished Jane would choke on other people's stuff. But Kelly was too quiet. All she said was, "We've been together so many years, and you don't know me that well." She was settling into the village. Any walk turned into a long journey. You have to go to the shop, put an hour on it. To the pharmacy, to the post office that's even further. Only the church was close. Almost across the road you could see the domes through the window. The church, by some whim of fate, was the same color as her hut. But it was not a second home for Kelly. The priest was too peculiar. Father Valentine had nothing in common with that legendary Valentine of love. Soon Kelly began to suspect that the priest had been exiled to such a remote village for his brashness. He considered himself to be the first authority for everyone. He criticized even his own superiors, going as far as the patriarch and parishioners, at whom he was angry. Could get a nettle on the forehead from the expansive priest. The women who worked in the temple hoped that it was a youthful thing, that it would all pass. The only sin that the priest could admit to with a stiffened heart was that he was a complete stranger to Nestiazatism. His house was the best in the village, and there was room for another church. Still, Kelly came to the services at least once in a while, stood at the door, and as soon as she felt stuffy, hurried out into the fresh air. Luckily for her, the family had a hospital, not a hospital, but a small, cool, almost empty old hospital, where Kelly was monitored so that she didn't have to travel far in a crowded bus to the district center. Gradually, Kelly was drawn into her new existence. She planted her own herbs in the vegetable garden, remembered the names of the local shop assistants. She was already left her favorite buns in Rozhenka when the goods were finished. People on the street greeted her. And yet she was afraid of the nights. In the city, the night is conventional, except that at 2 or 3 o'clock the streets quiet down for a while. The village, on the other hand, was sinking into darkness like the sea. Rare lanterns and lights not in all the houses. The darkness seemed to swamp everything around it. The glowing windows somewhere made one think of a ship standing in the distance, on the roadstead. Anything could happen at night. Kelly was afraid that her labor would start at night too, and the ambulance wouldn't arrive in time. So she agreed to go to the hospital a few days before her due date, and was glad she hadn't had time to get a cat like she wanted. Who would she leave her with now? There was nothing left for her but to rely entirely on fate. Would she live? Would the baby be all right? Would she have the strength to look after it? All this now depended not on her, but on some higher power. But everything had gone remarkably well. She even managed somehow to brace herself internally, and not to scream. And the boy that Anne the midwife had shown her had been very good too, though his face was red and puffy. "But look at his eyes, they're silver," said Anne. "I've never seen anything like them, really." Kelly knew she wouldn't name the baby James. She was superstitious now, catching the signs of fate. The son was not to repeat his father's fate. And a week later, when she returned home, staggering from weakness, she knew what name she would give her son Mark. They had never had such a name in their family before. Let everything begin with a clean slate. Father Valentine insisted that all newborns be baptized in the church. God forbid, not at home, even in the bitter cold. "Boys are brought into the altar," he said. "How can you deprive a child of that?" It was August. It smelled of apples, and at night the stars flew to earth as often as snow in winter. Mark's godparents were neighbors, husband and wife, Chloe and Ethan. When the boy was brought to the temple, he laughed for the first time. He was lying in Ethan's arms and pulling his hands upwards to where the blue haze of the dome was, and he laughed as if he saw someone he knew and was happy about it. "He sees angels," said the woman who cleaned the temple. There was sadness in her voice. Seeing angels is also a challenge, because cleanliness has to be matched. What Mark was seeing, naturally, no one knew about until the boy spoke. No one even understood what was going on. Well, the child laughs and stretches his arms as if someone is standing in front of him, but probably many babies do that. And sometimes, especially at night, when Kelly put him to bed, Mark would cry and wrap himself in the blanket, as if he hoped to escape under it. "What are you afraid of?" Luba coaxed him affectionately. "There's no one in the room, only you and me and the cat sitting over there, washing itself. The cat that they had been given as a present and crossed themselves over. Probably the neighbors didn't know where to give the litter." It was the most ordinary, gray-colored, nasal, big-eyed. Later it seemed to Luba that she had special feelings for the boy. There was a cupboard in the room, left by the previous owner. They had been like this in almost every house before, tall, wooden, with hangers on the right, shelves on the left, and a square of glass in the door, covered with embroidery. On a black background, an old woman had painted roses with a needle and thread. Mark was afraid of the wardrobe at night. During the day he could climb into it and play there, God knows what he imagined, among the hangers of dresses. He could have a house or a spaceship in there, but when it started to get dark, the first place where that darkness descended was the wardrobe ajar. Mark didn't even dare look in there. And if his gaze did fall there by chance, he withdrew it immediately, as if something terrible lurked there and watched him from there, something better not to be seen face to face. Then the cat would leap to Mark and stare into the darkness herself, staring with cold yellow eyes, as if she were on guard and watching. She knew unmistakably when the boy was worried, when he was having nightmares, and she would slip in and lay on his chest, becoming a shield between him and those he feared. Distracted by her song, she purred surprisingly loudly. As Mark began to talk, Kelly asked him, "Honey, what do you see?" "There." He answered expressively, nodding at the cupboard and raising his eyebrows, not understanding how the obvious could not be clear to her, and almost adding, "There it is." Sometimes, to his mother's utter consternation, Mark began to mutter excitedly and quickly, talking either to himself or to someone whom today's psychologists like to call an imaginary friend. In everything else, the boy not only did not differ from his peers for the worse, he outperformed them. About 3 years old, learned to read, and by the time he went to school, read many books from the Library of Adventures. He knew a lot of poetry, wrote in jagged block letters, and had the kind of imagination that made the fairy tales so beloved by children pale in comparison. On a warm April evening, Kelly sat with Mark by the river. Even though she was settling in a new place, but still she could call only her son her soulmate. And when she had the chance, she took him by the hand, and they went for a walk somewhere far away, then along the path among the meadows that bloomed so gloriously in summer. Then between the mysterious ferns, the forest was in darkness, and the ferns seemed to glow by themselves with a soft green light to a distant lake or following the bends of the river, where the local boys did not climb. They sat on the cliff, looking at the swift current, at the sand. It was amazing here, almost completely white, silky, and suddenly Mark touched his mother's elbow. "Look, Mum, there's a leshy," he said. Kelly took a look. It was just a huge, human-sized stump with petrified, intertwined roots. "Look at it, look at it. It's the woodsman leaning over the river. He is old. He came out of the forest after winter and came to say hello to the mermaid. She is looking at him from the pool, and he extends his hand to her, saying, 'Well, have you survived the cold?'" Kelly realized it was all imagination. "You'll probably write your own book someday." She kept wanting to hug her son, to hold him. And every time she held back from doing it, she couldn't. She couldn't let Mark become too tender, too vulnerable. He had to live in a cruel world. She knew that well. "No, Mom, and I'd love not to see it, but it's there, you know. We went to the cemetery yesterday," he said, even with irritation. They did go there yesterday, along with an old lady neighbor who had asked him to help clean up a grave. It was already difficult for her to bend over, but she wanted to visit her husband. The old lady walked with her right hand resting on a stick, with Kelly supporting her on her left. "So?" Her mother didn't understand. Mark sighed. "There was also a funeral going on at that time, remember? Well, this auntie, she stood back and watched." "What lady?" Kelly asked. Mark patiently explained. "The one they thought was buried. She stood to the side and watched them. Only she was a little different, not like them, as if she were made of thick fog, a little transparent, wearing a white polka dot blouse, a pleated skirt, and a scarf." Kelly inwardly gasped. She knew who Mark was talking about because she had gone to say goodbye to the deceased. She was already part of that circle when everyone from the neighborhood saw the deceased off, when neighbors came to celebrate a wedding or a birth. But she hadn't taken Mark with her to the house yesterday, and the only thing he could see in the cemetery was a staked coffin. Kelly squatted down in front of her son and took him by the shoulders. "I'm begging you," she said. "No, I beg you. Tell me everything you see that others don't see, only me. Only me. Do you understand?" He looked at her earnestly with his silver eyes, which the further they went, the more they took on a marvelous hue. She was not a hypnotist. She could not suggest anything to him, but he could sense from her tone that the matter was serious. "Do you understand?" She tried to explain to him as an adult. "If you like this, left and right will start to tell everyone about the foresters and ghosts. At first people will think that you're making up everything, that you just think it, and when you grow up a little, you'll be locked up in a madhouse." "Where to?" "Ben." He had this habit of raising his eyebrows. "It's a place where they lock you in a room and don't let you see your mum. There are bars on the windows. You sit on a chain like a dog and they feed you from a dog bowl." In her heart, Kelly asked the higher powers to forgive her for this cruelty, because the worst thing for her was that if Mark was declared insane, they might not put him in an asylum, but they wouldn't be able to avoid notoriety. And if it stuck, alas, forever. Mark nodded. "But if something scares you, if there's something you want to share, we'll talk to you about it," Kelly insinuated, squeezing his hand painfully. "But only to me, only to me, only to me about it. Deal?" Mark kept his word. What he'd really been through, even Kelly didn't know. You can't describe every shadow, every look or call from the beyond. Mark had learned to hold back. The only time he'd nearly blundered was when, in 10th grade, the boys had decided to celebrate Halloween. By this time, his classmates already knew that Mark was the best artist in the school, and he was asked to make up those who came in costumes. One of the worst bullies, Alex Smith, dressed up as a devil, and when he sat down on a chair in front of Mark, he looked up and shuddered. Then he picked up a box of paints, but every time he swung the brush, Mark looked away, as if he were drawing a picture from the original. The makeup was amazing. Alex was scared of himself in the mirror. "How did you come up with that?" he asked, looking at the creepy image he had created. There he stands. Mark started and stopped, and that autumn he was being drafted into the army. Kelly desperately didn't want to let her son go, but she just didn't know how to avoid it. He'd grown up to be a healthy, good-looking lad, the kind of guy who wouldn't be rejected by the medical board. Unless he had to pay someone a bribe, there was money. But how to do it all? Kelly agonized. She was embarrassed, ashamed, but she felt more sorry for Mark. "No need, Mom. I'll go and come back," said the son. "That's what I'm telling you. Let's go into town while we still have time. You can show me your father's grave." Kelly didn't know where James was buried. but it wasn't hard to find him. Every cemetery has its Rublevka, and this was one, laid out in the bad 90s. It was first inhabited by higher-class gangsters, victims of contract killings and random shootings. Then, they were joined by businessmen from the same gangster circles of higher class, but they stayed here longer. Servants of the people and the heads of the last surviving factories were added here. The monuments were rich black or colored granite 1.5, 2 human heights. Gloomy spruce trees, heavy chains fencing off the slabs of the grounds. The burials were with reserve, with the expectation for the whole family in the future. But sometimes there were decent men here. James had a simple white marble monument. On his gravestone were surgical gloves and a scalpel, as if he'd just come back from an operation and dropped them without looking. Kelly was grateful to fate that the grave had been found, and so quickly that she could show it to her son. She shifted her gaze from the monument to her son, who was taller than she was. Mark stood and stared, his face growing more and more perplexed. And then he said, "There's no one here." "What do you mean?" "The coffin is empty." Kelly searched for an explanation. She already knew her son wasn't wrong. But there was no way he could be right. "But it's been so long. And there was a big fire. It must have been like a crematorium." Mark only shook his head, but he looked at his mother again and said nothing. They walked towards the exit along the cemetery alley, and golden maple leaves swirled above them. Mark served really well. He wrote letters to his mother, which not only had no complaints, but always a joke, always a light mockery, and Kelly smiled as she read them. But he didn't go back. He found a job in town. And what a job. Kelly fought with her son for almost the first time. "Your father's going to curse me from the dead," she said in tears. He was ahead, above everyone else, a real intellectual, a scientist. He probably could not even imagine that his son would not go to the institute. "Where are you going?" "To the dog shelter, washing bowls and cleaning up faces." "Mum." Mark's voice came through the phone as if his son were there. "At least there's no blackness, none at all, even when they're dying." "Well, you know all dogs go to heaven." The shelter was run by volunteers. There were only 1, 2 or 4 regular workers. Emma, who was considered the owner, was an attractive middle-aged blonde. She had a good voice, and from time to time she organized charity concerts in town. She sang to earn the dogs and cats some bread, or rather chicken carcasses, groats and dry food. And then there was Mary, who cleaned the small little dogs that sat in separate cages. The cages stood on top of each other, and the whole thing looked like an open multi-story house. Mary kept order and had some veterinary skills. And finally there was Mark, who did all the heavy lifting. He was paid enough for food in a rented flat, a modest 1-bedroom. However, he was not always able to go there at night. 500 tailed souls lived in the shelter, and it often turned out that some of them could not be left unattended even for a few hours. The shelter was enclosed by a high, blank fence. It was located almost outside the city, in an industrial zone. There was no housing here. Still, many people had strong feelings about the shelter. Some people were disturbed by the very fact of its existence. These people demanded the destruction of all the inhabitants of the shelter, and sometimes even threw poison in pieces of meat over the fence. Others brought in dogs and cats that they could not keep for some reason. Sometimes they solved the issue honestly. They paid a fee. Sometimes they tried to drive up quietly, tied the dog at the gate and left, saying that they would take the poor thing anyway. They wouldn't go anywhere. Just behind the fence there was a hut. It was considered to be Emma's office. But in fact, it served as a servant's quarters for everyone. There were refrigerators with dog food and medicines. Here the weakest puppies lived in boxes, and here the shelter duty officer, most often Mark, slept on the sofa. There was also a large structure that looked like a hangar. Small dogs lived in cages here and cats in a separate room. And in the courtyard there were enclosures close together, one to the other, with 2 big dogs in each enclosure. Morning was the time when it was impossible to sit down. Mark cooked food for the animals on the fire. The shelter had poor amenities. Even light and water were constantly cut off because of debts. If possible, water was stored in large bowls, and almost every day rats drowned in them, which could not be eradicated. Feed the animals, clean the cages, give injections to the sick, take someone to the vet. Time flew by. In the afternoon, volunteers, mostly schoolgirls, would arrive and the lucky dogs would go for a walk with them. Hands were in short supply, and someone would get a chance to get out of their cage once every few months. Every dog and every cat had a hard fate behind them. Mark felt sorry for all of them, but he had a special relationship with Gerda, a sheepdog who came to the shelter last year. Later we learned that the owner had culled the dog because its ears did not stand up in due time. So as a teenager, Gerda found herself on the street. She joined a small pack of stray dogs. Together, in the jungle of the big city, it was easier to survive. She fell in love with the pack. Volunteers found the sheepdog in the winter. She hadn't left her mate for 24 hours. He was hit by a car and was still alive, slowly freezing. They took the dog to the clinic and gave the dogs names. He's Kai, she's Gerda. An emergency collection for treatment was announced, but Kai could not be saved. Gerda stayed at the shelter. Sheepdogs in general pick up everything on the fly, and Gerda eventually started to live out of her enclosure. She was so intelligent that she freely walked around the territory at night, guarding it. During the day, she watched out for strangers who came to the shelter, but never once bit anyone. For some reason, she chose Mark out of all of them and stayed near him, and somehow, in between, easily learnt all the commands. And now, when Mark stayed overnight in the shed, he sat on the doorstep, watching the sunset, and Gerda lay at his feet. Maybe some people complained about the stale air around the shelter, too many dogs, no matter how much you cleaned, but Mark breathed easy here. He was used to seeing more than the others, and though he was used to it, he was often uneasy among people. In the shelter, those attentive eyes, hot breathing tongues, the hope to live another day, and the vast sky above his head. There were no high-rise buildings around the sky looked at the dogs, and many went there on their last journey because there were enough sick and crippled. Feeding, treating, placing in good hands, all this was hard work, and it occupied both hands and thoughts. This was Mark's place on Earth. The car pulled up in the evening. The first to hear it, of course, was Gerda. Seeing the dog's upturned muzzle, Mark listened too. Someone else has been brought in, he thought. Now they'll leave them and go away. If they're helpless puppies or kittens in a box, leave them outside overnight. They might live till morning. The hour was already quite late. Mark was lying on the sofa, watching a film of French comedy as old as this little TV set. As he was putting on his shoes, a car honked. Whoever was there wasn't going to run away quietly like a thief. Gerda, of course, had linked up with him to check the situation and make sure Mark wasn't in any danger. Near the gate, not far from the lilac bushes, you couldn't see them in the darkness, only the sweet smell could be heard, stood a black Jeep, and next to it a woman of small stature, with smoothly slicked back hair, also all in black jacket jeans. Sometimes Mark sensed something unkind coming from the man, but it wasn't there now. But anxiety was born and grew. "Did you bring someone?" he asked, saying hello. "It would be better to do it this afternoon. There is a contract to be drawn up." "I'm here to see you, Mark," said the woman. Her voice was slightly hoarse, but what surprised Mark most of all was that she knew him by name. He had almost no acquaintances in town, outside the shelter, except for volunteers and veterinarians. "What did you want from me? Can we talk to you?" He caught the insistence in her voice and hesitated to ask her out. "There's a dozen puppies in the shed. Not every untrained person could handle it. To the dogs, they'd raise a fuss." "Let's get in the car," the woman said. She didn't switch on the interior lights, and when Mark sat down next to her, he could see her face in profile, lit only by the light of the moon. Gerda remained lying beside the car. "I wanted to offer you a job," said the woman. He was even more confused. "But I'm not going to leave here." She turned towards him. The darkness now completely hid her face, and only her eyes glittered slightly. "Mark, I'm not going to lure you away from the orphanage with tempting conditions. It's more serious than that. My husband and your father were once friends. I'm the only one who knows whose son you are, and God forbid anyone else should find out." She did manage to stun him. "Listen to what I have to say." She touched his hand, her fingers were icy cold. "Your father's death has remained a mystery to the inquiry, hasn't it?" He didn't speak of what he'd discovered in the cemetery. He just nodded. "The investigators couldn't find out who was involved in James's death. All ends in water. It's a cult, Mark. It's the kind of force that shouldn't be allowed into our lives." The woman introduced herself. Her name was Isabella, and her husband, also now deceased, was Sam. She and James grew up together, went to medical school together. James was truly one of a kind. Such heightened sensitivity multiplied by knowledge. Disease has 1,000 subtle signs that even doctors don't always pay attention to. There's no way to put them all together. James saw, felt, anticipated. I don't remember him being wrong. 01759, my husband didn't have anywhere near that gift, but sometimes he had dreams. And yes, while your father was a surgeon, my husband was a psychiatrist. And so, the woman was silent, whether to cope with her feelings or to choose her words. At first it seemed that all these people, mostly young people, boys and girls, that they were just looking for extreme sports and had gone a little bit far where it was dangerous. They flocked from all over the world, even from Siberia, I think. I learned that later on by crumbs, by drops. The newcomers signed an agreement in blood, of course, that they renounced any faith and would serve only darkness. They met first at the home of one of these sectarians who lived on the outskirts of the city. Then they found a hut in the woods. Rituals, ceremonies, reading books on black magic. You see, Mark, you can't joke about this. Even with the occult aspects aside, it just makes you go crazy fast. And yes, they had sacrifices. They started with pets. And I won't tell you what they did to them. It'll hurt you to hear it. But eventually they got to humans. Firstly, once you joined the sect, you couldn't leave alive. Secondly, it was believed that if a person with a special gift was sacrificed, everyone who participated in the ritual would become stronger. So they searched for such unusual people. And of course they couldn't miss your father. And yes, he knew about it, knew they had sentenced him. So why didn't he go? How many were there? You mean the police? There's about 100 of them today, as far as I know. When you're dealing with fanatics of an idea, especially an idea like this, it's scary. What police? If you're sentenced, tomorrow on the street a random passerby will just stick a shiv in your side. Believe me, there will be a way. My husband took your father's death very hard. He said that the leaders of this sect were mentally ill, that they needed to be treated. There were cases he discouraged kids from going there, discouraged all those who were lured by this black romance. And he paid the price. He was next. He had a gift, too. James told Sam about your mum, so I've been following her life from afar, and I know who you are. And now my daughter's in danger. I think you're the only one who can protect her. Mark was released with great reluctance. It was only when he left unexpectedly and without any clear reason that it became clear how indispensable he was to the orphanage. Mark assured them he wasn't going for long. But he said it out of thin air, and he wasn't sure of anything. If Isabella was a wealthy woman, as he thought, she could hire a professional guard, or even a bodyguard for her daughter. He himself had no skills under his belt other than the army, where Mark had been trained as a signalman and had been allowed to shoot a machine gun once. What Isabella was hoping for was beyond his comprehension. I'll tell you more about it on the spot, she promised and added as a control shot. Please don't refuse, in memory of my father, in memory of their friendship with my husband. And now they were driving this very black Jeep, and looking through the tinted windows was literally seeing the world in black, as if he were deeply depressed. How did your husband die? Mark asked, because it was going to be a long journey and there was something to talk about. Isabella gripped the steering wheel tighter as the tarmac changed to dirt and the car shook. No big deal to anyone. I went to the dacha in early spring with my daughter, with Mia, and went fishing, and then they found him. He was lying face down in the water. We were told he'd suffocated. There was no water in his lungs. It was his heart. But couldn't that have happened? Lots of people have heart attacks. Why do you suspect someone? It's paranoia, isn't it? I'm too afraid for my daughter. Isabella said melancholically. All these years I've been following this sect as far as I can, even if indirectly, even if by word of mouth, but these guys have what they call their own handwriting. Do you understand? They offered both of them, first James, then Sam, to join them. If your dad wanted to, he could have made a career out of it. Imagine when one of their adepts can see through people, diagnose and heal, how cool that would be for them. After he flat out refused, he was warned since he didn't want to be a follower, he would become a victim. And then there was that final warning when he realized that it was serious, and that he was essentially condemned. That's when he met your mother. It's kind of a miracle that you were born, you know? And Sam was ruined by his tongue. He was mocking and openly trying to fight against them. I warned him against it. It was no use. When he left, for a while I thought it was a coincidence too, a tragic accident. Of course, these guys wouldn't stop. Sacrifice is a regular ritual. And all those people, victims of fires that happen somewhere in the woods or in old abandoned houses, it's their work. But the other day, traditionally, with the onset of the warm season, the family would move to the cottage. This continued even after Sam's death. Lydia has her own firm. She is an interior designer and often went to the customers in the morning, and Mia was left alone. The garden community is small. Its quiet, grassy streets are deserted for part of the day. All the neighbors know each other, and a new person is immediately in sight. But Mia, lying in a hammock in the garden, was not alert when she saw a stubby boy, about her own age. He asked for a drink, and she let him draw water from their well. Even in the heat of the day, the water was cold and clear as a tear. "Don't you miss your father?" he asked, suddenly winking at her. "Don't be sad. You'll meet him soon." Isabella kept her daughter safe. She didn't tell her anything scary, anything that might frighten or upset her. That's why Mia didn't pay much attention to the conversation, but she passed it on to her mother. A strange man came in, and Isabella was terribly worried. They're going round and round, you see. They've got some kind of diabolical circle. The murders happen in the same places at roughly equal intervals. When these people target someone, they act with the tenacity of fanatics. They have to get what they want at all costs, At any cost. There's no logic to it. Isabella slowed down and turned to Mark. Her voice sounded almost pleading. "Do you see why I came to you? Everywhere I go now, I get laughed at. Some boy asked for water and said something. But my husband's death has nothing to do with criminality in the eyes of everyone. What do you think of it? If there's no sign of violence." Sam was startled by something, startled to such a degree, so horrified that his heart stopped. That look on his face, then his features smoothed out. But I remember I saw him shortly after, and that's when it all started again. It was your mom, Mark, who told me about the gift you inherited from your father. Only it's gone further with you, you see more. Only you can sense trouble coming. I'm not asking you to get involved, God forbid. I'm not asking you to go into battle for my Mia, but to warn you, just to warn you, to hide her somewhere in time. They won't be after you. They know nothing about you, though you would no doubt be a very valuable asset to them. If you fall into their clutches, it's like falling into the clutches of a spider. You can't get out. They drug the victim, then scotch them. No one hears anything, and they don't find the victim right away. I only know you won't believe it, because thanks to your gift, what others can only laugh at is unquestionable to you. Gerda lay at Mark's feet, shifting her gaze from Isabella to her master and breathing hotly, sticking out her tongue. It was indeed a fertile corner. Isabella, with a special key, opened the gates of the garden community, and they seemed to enter a completely different world, where silence, emerald grass, birdsong, and negativity. On this day there were no dacha dwellers. Only one woman was digging up the soil on her plot, and a man was lying on the veranda on an old sofa, and his peace was rested by a dog, but good-natured, it did not even bark at the car. Isabella's cottage struck Mark. It was something between a rustic cottage in the mountains somewhere in Europe and a medieval castle. A real tower of rough stone beckoned to the eye. "Wow," he said involuntarily. Isabella glanced round, grinned. "I like this place. There's a lake nearby, you'll see. But when I bought the land, it was all overgrown with wild grapes, and there was a half-collapsed hut hiding in it. Why a tower? I'm an extreme designer, and I've loved Bradbury since I was a kid. At the end of every spring I bought dandelion wine, and by autumn I'd read the book to death. I just breathed it. I learned to see the miracles in everything around me. Once a week, Douglas was allowed to sleep in his grandfather's tower. He'd run up the dark spiral staircase to the top and go to sleep in that magician's abode amidst thunder and visions. And in the early hours of the morning, when even the milkman was not yet clinking bottles in the streets, he would wake up and work his cherished magic. Now, Mia adores the place. At the very top of the tower, a platform opens up. There you can admire the moon and greet the dawn, or sometimes both at once. Mia calls the tower visiting the sky. Mia was thin and small. There was no way she could be 18 years old, a teenage schoolgirl, that's all. Gerda interested her much more than Mark. Already getting acquainted on the porch, she was ready to caress her, but hesitated. She won't bite, she's smart. So don't be afraid. They switched to you almost immediately, though. Isabella went to the kitchen to find something to feed the young people. Mark knew that by evening she would have to leave and spend the night in the city, because early in the morning she would be waiting for a client, an intrusive uncle who wanted to make everything in his mansion to the highest standards. "I suggest green borscht." Isabella looked out of the kitchen. "How's that?" "Mia, show Mark around the neighborhood, take him to the lake." For Gerda, getting to know the area was of the utmost importance. She walked ahead of the young people. Mark was not mistaken. This green corner was deserted at this hour, golden flowers on the grass and Mia walking on his right hand. The girl was walking with her head down, as if she wanted to find something among the grass and flowers. Mark didn't feel anything wrong yet. The day was too sunny, the breeze too warm and gentle. There was no room for shadows. From this edge of the fellowship was surrounded by a wooden fence, a rather dilapidated one though. Micah ducked into a gap where a board had fallen off and waited for Mark to follow. Further on, beyond a small hill, there was a lake, marked on the maps as Pridorojnoi, though it was quite far from any roads, and just beyond the lake the forest began. Dachniks came here to catch small fish or just sit by the water. They took good photos here. The lake was small, but framed by the forest and weeping willows, it was picturesque. However, Mark's heart was suddenly racing. He saw several butterflies, big black beauties, fluttering over the water. Mark even blinked, hoping it was a vision, that he was just overheating in the sun. They couldn't be here. He had once looked up the species in a book and had learnt that they lived somewhere else. But he'd seen them several times before the news of someone's sudden death. "What do you think?" he asked Maya after all, nodding at that black dance. If she had seen it too, she would have said something like, "How beautiful." "The boys are swimming here." Mia shrugged her shoulders. "I tried it once and lost my footing. The bottom was too boggy. They say there's a ford somewhere. I don't know where." They settled down on the bank, right on the grass, dry and warm. Mark didn't know if he could ask Mia. Did she know anything about what she was facing? Was she afraid? But as it turns out, children know more than their parents realize. Mia started this conversation on her own. "I know why your mum called you." She wasn't looking at Mark, she was looking at the lake. "But I don't think it's worth it. There's some serious guys out there. What are you going to do with them? Even with the dog?" "What makes you think they're so serious?" he asked with deliberate carelessness. "You see, Mum can keep her mouth shut, but not that serious. When she started asking me questions, she let something slip. And then I did what I could on my own. They just don't accept the weak. They have a whole series of entrance tests. A marathon not to run, but to walk with heavy rucksacks through the mountains. Not everyone made it, but they have a death cult. They are not afraid of it. You can't die, you can't play in all this, you can't immerse yourself in it, the darkness will pull you in." Who would you say that to? Mark thought. And then the epic continues. They order their own knives. Like personal, magical knives. There are special blacksmiths there too, with runes and signs on the knives. And each of them has to drink blood with his knife, choose it himself, catch it and sacrifice someone. Gerda raised her head and looked at the girl carefully. Mia rubbed her head, dared her. At least a bird or a cat. There is a real gradation of victims. Forest animals are valued higher because they are harder to catch. Try to catch one, even a hare. And the highest sacrifice is a human. Mia looked Mark straight in the eye. The ultimate sacrifice is yourself. When you don't make an attempt on someone, but lie down on the altar yourself. Isabella fed him a delicious green borscht and left a fridge full of food. "I'll try to be here tomorrow evening, the day after tomorrow at the earliest. I know Mia doesn't bother with cooking, at least make yourself some sandwiches and coffee. I'll leave the cutlets in the pot under the lid. Please." Now she was talking to Mark. "Lock the gate well at night." They met sunsets in the tower, or rather at the very top, on the platform Mia had chosen. They drank coffee, watched the sun sink behind the lake. "It's a full moon tonight," Mia said. "I don't know if they believe in anything other than their sect and who they think is their master. I read a book about vampires when I was a kid. It said that vampires loved moonlit nights, and that they followed the moonbeams like a river." Mark was busy with a more mundane task. He opened a satellite map and studied his surroundings, slowly moving his finger over the map on his mobile screen. "Is that a swamp?" he wondered, pointing to where the holiday village ended. "Not exactly. It's boggy, but it's not really a swamp. Except in spring. when the water stands for a long time, and in autumn it all thins out. But in summer the ground dries up and there are so many flowers there. What's this? Mark pointed his finger. A settlement. Look, there seems to be a path leading there, quite far from here, and I don't know whether there are houses or not. It's not a path, it's a concrete road, a slab road. And where you're pointing, there used to be a village there. It's almost gone now, just ruins. I know that a man lived there for a long time, hiding from his wife. He said he was happy there. It was quiet. How do you know all this? My father used to take me there on his motorbike. He was hoping to find the treasure. Dad had this romanticism in him. There's a mountain or a hill about 60 meters high. There's lowlands all around. And when you get to the hill, you can see everything. Dad said there's a whole network of caves and underground passages. God knows who dug them and when. It was either an underground monastery or a hiding place for bandits. Papa was always very careful that I didn't stumble or fall into anything. And he made me promise that I would never go there alone, because if anything happened there, there would be no help. No one would even know where you had disappeared. I don't know why Dad thought that. I wouldn't have gone myself, it's too far. Did you love your father very much? Unexpectedly to himself, Mark asked. It was already evening light, but it seemed to him that she had tears in her eyes. Maya nodded. Very much. Most of all, Mum is nice, but she always has things to do, always has her head full. And for my father, I knew there was no one more important than me. Do you remember your father? I've only seen pictures of him. He was quite a famous man. More than famous. Mia confirmed it. Do you have those weird eyes? You know, they're like mirrors. It seems that just a little more and something so otherworldly will be reflected in the mirrors or windows to another world. She shifted her gaze and shuddered. Look over there. She pointed towards the lake, where the darkness had already thickened. What is there? Mark lowered his voice involuntarily and wished they were still at the top of the tower, out in the open. Look at those green lights. There's 2. Fireflies, maybe? They're small. I couldn't see them from up here. It's far away. You mean eyes? Mark might have wanted to make a mocking tone in his voice to cheer the girl up, but the question sounded serious against his will. No, not eyes. Maybe it was a torch. Let's get out of here. You go to your room and I'll check the gate again. And then Gerda and I will go round the estate. The dog hasn't felt threatened yet. Maybe the key word was yet. But Mark sat in Mia's room for a long time, and she told him what she had learned. About how a willing victim spends his last night among the sectarians, about the farewell ceremony and the actual sacrifice and such horrors. Finally, he noticed that the girl's eyes were beginning to slip. When he came to himself, however, he went back to the satellite maps for some reason, found the very same hill and zoomed in, as if hoping to see some traces of life there, or at least the very caves. Mark woke up to the fact that the room was cold. It was not uncommon to have frost in the morning. Now the wind must have opened the window, and Mark felt cold. Gerda put her paws on the windowsill. It was just beginning to dawn, and the sheepdog was looking out into the twilight and shivering visibly. Mark got up to shut the window more quickly, rubbed the dog on the withers, saying that now we would warm up. But Gerda was still shivering. Without realizing why, Mark went out into the corridor. The front door was closed. But as soon as the young man touched the handle, the door opened into the dark garden. Someone had opened the English lock. Mark started quickly up the stairs. He had not yet called out to the girl, though he would very much like to do so. So what if everything is safe and Mia is asleep and he wakes her up? He quietly opened the door to her room. Gerda slipped past him, and he didn't have time to stop her. The room was empty, only the white crumpled bed, the window closed. Gerda was sniffing at something on the floor. Mark crouched down and, not believing himself, touched a smeared spot of blood. They ran towards the lake, Mark following the sheepdog. The grass was damp with icy dew, the branches wet. The lake at this hour was like silver mirrors. They've crossed it, Mark thought, to break the trail. But how did they get Mia out with a knife to her throat? Not a peep then. He gazed. There was a black line drawn precisely on the water. The butterflies had lined up, marking the ford with their wings. On the other side of the lake, Gerda had picked up the trail at once, but he would have found the way without her. He had looked at the map too long. and too closely the day before to be mistaken. It was a concrete road, old, not wide, 2 slabs only. Between these slabs grass was already growing thickly. At first the road led him to a river, over which there was a bridge, a plank bridge, over which a car could pass. On the other bank were trees, huge trunks of trees uprooted, their roots intertwined and twisted, and from afar they looked like giant spiders blocking the way. Mark knew he had a long way to go. He had no doubt where Mia had been taken. It would take him hours to get there, and he would have to listen every minute to see if anyone was around. And he couldn't wait. Mark had brought his phone with him, but it was of little use here. The connection was not catching an empty white triangle in the corner of the screen. Not a single bar. Gerda realized that her master was in a hurry. She was ready to break off into a run, but then she would break away from him. She went far ahead, and she walked beside him, and Mark walked quickly, then switched to a run. The sun was already beginning to rise, showing its red side from behind the horizon, when Mark reached the abandoned village. It was a sad sight. 700 people had once lived here, but there were few reminders of it anymore. The shrubbery had grown so high that it hid the shrubberies, which had fallen into disrepair. Only the roofs were visible, and the streets were still visible. One might have thought that this place would attract those who practiced a death cult. But Mark felt there was no one here. To turn on and there would be a lake, the shores of which were so favored by vipers that it would be better not to go there without boots. To the protected mountain. The way lay straight ahead. Only the concrete ended here and there was only a path left. Now he had to be doubly careful. It was already light, and they were close. Whenever possible, Mark tried to walk at the edge of the forest without losing sight of the path, and when he noticed a long, high hill ahead, he retreated into the thicket. It was a place that all the locals tried to avoid. It was tempting, though there was a rumor that untold riches were hidden here. Who kept them here? Who knows? Bandits. Who else? But who? According to some rumors, those whose ataman was Stenka Razin, according to others, the companions of Imli and Pugashev. And whoever said it all started with the old believers. They inhabited the local caves, deepened them, and then gave permission to those who came here to escape from the authorities, or just from the evil baron to settle in the neighborhood. It happened that the robbers stayed here for the winter, and in the spring they left for their criminal activities on the big water. But who settled in the caves now? When Mark saw the smoke, he crawled the last few meters rather than walked. Gerda knew the command to crawl perfectly well and breathed noisily. In a few minutes, Mark was already looking at the sight before him. Mia had said, like her mother, that there were about 100 people in this sect, or what the hell to call it. But now Mark noticed 12 too. For some reason, it reminded him of all the reenactment clubs. Right at the foot of the mountain, there was a fire, but not a strange one, not a sacrificial one, but just warming and cooking breakfast. And someone didn't care much about firewood. They used dried out wood. That's why there was smoke from it. Many of the guys were really strong physically, even outwardly it was noticeable, were dressed in some strange gray hoods or cloaks of coarse cloth. Maybe such clothes were practical here. They protected them from the morning cold and annoying midges. And they were not sorry to get dirty or burnt by sparks from the fire. But only the Middle Ages came to mind, with its bonfires and the mad eyes of fanatics. A very thin man with gray hair grown back below his shoulders was stirring the brew in a cauldron. He was older than the others, and much older. Perhaps he was the head of the sect. But Mark dismissed the thought. It was unlikely that the master would be serving the others, preparing their breakfast. What Mark hadn't expected was that the man would suddenly raise his eyes and look exactly where he was hiding in the dense foliage, and seemingly, despite such a veil, would see him. It was a total, absolute failure. And if he now called out to these boys and pointed in the direction where the stranger lurked, Mark would not escape or hide, and neither will Gerda. What will a dog do against so many people? It won't even stop them. And worst of all, no one and nothing will be able to save Mia. The man looked at him without taking his eyes off and seemed to have even dropped the spoon he was holding in his hand. Mark was also used to trusting his senses. This time he didn't feel threatened. Not only that, but he had a growing feeling that he knew this man from somewhere, even though it was impossible. Judging by his appearance, the man hadn't been out of the forest for a long time. And then the stranger's features seemed to overlap with a photograph in his memory, the one his mother had shown him. Mark blinked his eyes a lot. Wasn't James coming from the other side of the world? Or had he, after all? The man stood up and took a few steps toward Mark and suddenly put a finger to his lips. It was a gesture of invitation, saying, "Shay shall come to you now and we'll talk." Mark nodded. It was dangerous, though, terribly dangerous. Maybe the man only wanted to calm his guard and then get close, grab his shoulder with his strong fingers, and then call the others. James, or whoever it was, took his time walking toward the thicket. There was no telling what the man was up to. It was only when the branches closed behind him and Mark was 2 steps away that the man squatted down beside him and asked, "Who are you? Who are you?" was the first thing that came to Mark's mind. "I recognized you by your eyes," James said quietly. "My grandfather had eyes like that." He raised his hand, wanting to touch Mark's eyelids, but didn't. Not just gray, but like molten metal. "My grandfather, too, saw things that no one else could. Your mom's Kelly, isn't she?" "So if I'm your son," Mark whispered. "And you're really alive, why the hell have you been stuck here for so many years? Or have you gone crazy too and become one of them?" "I haven't gone mad." James was so thin that his eyes seemed to have sunken deep. "It was just that they needed me alive then, to keep me with them. And they made it clear to me that if I didn't agree, the people closest to me would suffer. Sooner or later they would have found out about your mom and got to her. So what did you do with them?" "I treated them. I needed that kind of help here too. They also demanded to tell them everything I know about psyche hypothesis, about human superpowers. They hoped that I would teach them to be like myself, to develop the same abilities in them." "And what happened?" It sounded venomous, but James only grinned faintly. "You know better than anyone that you're born with this gift, and it doesn't come from a black master. After all these years, you couldn't escape? There are guys here with a very unhappy and broken fate. Maybe it was pity that kept me here for a long time, but I tried to escape once. So, failed, caught, beaten up, and I was tracked for a long time. You decided to stay with them, even after they'd killed your friend?" Arseny shuddered and said quietly, "They didn't literally kill him. They wanted him to go with them, to live here. They showed him me on the phone, beaten up, while I was lying in a blackout. Anyway, he couldn't take it. I don't know the details. It must have been the heart. Who's in charge?" He didn't introduce himself. "I won't tell you his real name. They call him Karacourt here. He's completely mentally ill. He'd have to be on heavy medication, but that's why. Because of his weirdness, he's considered second to God. I mean, after the devil. What about you?" James apparently wanted to ask what had brought Mark here, but his son beat him to it. "So it's this Karacourt who's going to sacrifice Mia, the daughter of your best mate, tonight. Why don't you give him the knife? Will you hold a torch to the fire?" James flinched, and Mark realized he didn't know who Mia was. "Go over there, further into the woods," James said. "There's some sort of hunting lodge there, and wait. I don't know how long, maybe a long time, but I'll get her there for you." "Why should I believe you?" Mark asked. Arseny was silent for a few moments, then said sadly, "What else can you do?" Mark found the hunting lodge without difficulty, a small, old log cabin, where the two of them would have been cramped. No one had lived here for a long time, and it smelled rotten and damp inside. He let Hertha run round the neighborhood, and the sheepdog found a barely visible stream, from which they drank with pleasure, first the dog, then the master. The day was already drawing towards evening. There was still nothing to think of contacting the larger world, and Mark's spirits grew heavier and heavier. It was unlikely that Mia would be kept here for 2 whole nights. Most likely, everything would be resolved in a few hours. It would be much easier for them to drop off a body burnt beyond recognition than to hide a live girl, who of course would be searched for. Her mother would bring everyone to their feet, but now everything depended on one man, on Arseny, and he didn't seem quite normal to Mark either. How could one live for years among these ghouls and keep his sanity? Gerda was the first to hear the approach of the strangers. She jumped up, frozen like a statue. Mark put his palm on her withers. Quiet. He didn't want the dog to give them both away by barking or whimpering. James led Mia in front of him. She was barely walking. He was supporting her by the shoulder, and she too was wearing some kind of gray robe. The girl was unlike herself, tangled hair, a blank stare. What's wrong with her? Mark intercepted Mia. She's just been drugged. Can you smell it? And a bit of dope. She's been told she's going to be killed anyway, and this will make it easier for her to accept the inevitable. Now, get her in as fast as you can. But how will she walk in that condition? Mark asked, almost desperately. It's a long way. No one will chase you for a while. I promise. Stay close to the river, and as soon as you get a connection, call for help. Maybe they'll intercept you halfway down. What about you? If there's a willing victim, it's their favorite, James said nonchalantly, and before Mark could say anything, he was gone, disappearing into the fading twilight. One thing was certain over the years, even in this monstrous environment, he'd had those who were indebted to him, whose favor he'd won and who felt affection for him. It was because of this that he had now succeeded in getting Mia out. He sat alone until late in the evening, in the very cave where the condemned had spent their last hours, praying to himself that his son and his mate would reach the humans safely. Occasionally he sipped from a jug of the wine that was generously served to the prisoners. Better to let them go to the altar like somnambulas than to drag them screaming like pigs. James didn't think about himself. To be honest, he didn't want to live either. His body had survived, but his soul had been burned almost to the ground. A willing sacrifice in the eyes of the other members of the cult that justified everything. James knew that Karacourt would go ballistic. That was what happened when James was eventually brought to him. The ringleader didn't grovel to the caves. He was the only one here who had a dwelling. Psychiatry was the subject James had been worst at the Institute. But looking into those eyes, black and seemingly pupilless, and watching this extremely pale man swallow saliva that dripped down his chin, James had no doubt that he belonged in the ward behind the iron door with the bars on the window. You let her go so they could find their way to us and wipe us all out. Ends in the water. The river's close by. Consider me sorry for the girl. It's better than what you were going to do to her. James said. You took her from us. If his voice softened, it was only a little. I'll replace her. James reached out his hand towards the ajar door, and someone put a torch in it. He knew who it was. Sophia, the girl who had come to the cult last. She still couldn't get used to it. Everything longed for her mother. James raised the torch, illuminating the hut, where a single candle still burned and darkness crowded the corners. Now it was spellbound brightly. All that scary tinsel animal skins, rat skulls, acculturation books, all those black candles. The other boys still had a chance to get out. James had told his son the truth. There wasn't a person here who hadn't been broken by life one way or another. But there was only one crazy person here. You and I would make excellent victims, he said almost affectionately to the madman. James knew what was happening this minute. Sophia locking the door from the outside. Who, us? It would have been clear to anyone long ago. Karacourt still didn't understand. You and me, James explained to him. Your master has been waiting for you for a long time. He ran his hand along the walls. Old wood, how glorious it will burn. But it doesn't work like that. It's not time for me to go to the bonfire yet. The Karacourt's voice was already hysterical. James tried the torch on the towel over there, or on the robe hanging on the nail. The Karacourt rushed to the door, but James blocked his way. At first he thought it was sparks spraying from his eyes, but then he saw something out the window he'd never seen here before, the flashing beacons on police cars. Karacourt was beating on the locked door with both palms and screaming. James, on the other hand, stood with his torch down, barely able to keep his feet. He closed his eyes, relief making him want to cry. The alarm clock ticked quietly in the morning darkness. I could have bought an electronic silent one, but the analog one didn't bother me. On the contrary, the dull ticking didn't irritate her, helped her sleep, and in the morning it made her listen, dispelled her sleep. Jessica opened her eyes, glanced at the alarm clock. As always, she'd woken up 10 minutes before it rang. Now she would lie there for those 10 minutes, occasionally looking to see how much time was left. No need to get up, she'd wake up anyway. But no, there was no signal. Apparently, the brain only turns on cue. A reflex developed over the years. One day, Jessica set her alarm clock 10 minutes ahead. For 2 days, she woke up on the alarm clock and then again lay down, watching the red second hand jumping, and waited for the call. Some kind of time machine, not an alarm clock. Jessica was the kind of woman that age adds beauty and confidence to. In her 20s, she was just a cute, pretty, a little simple-minded student who was being chased by all her classmates. And now, by the age of 40, she was a beautiful, stylish, pedigreed, intelligent beauty. Her self-confidence attracted men, but no one dared to come close. Too good. She was not a haughty bitch, just behind her as if she was dragging a trail of prosperous family life. In fact, it had been that way until recently. Jessica lay there waiting for the alarm clock to ring. Even anxious thoughts slipped in, but they were not formulated. There was no signal yet. The alarm clock erupted, nasty and inescapable. Jessica turned it off without pity. But the start was given with doubt and suspicion. Jessica suspected her husband, doubted her happy married life. She married almost 15 years ago to a promising, aspiring businessman. At that time, Michael had a car service, and now there is a whole network. She had already graduated from college and taught at the Olympic Reserve School for several years. Promising athletes were brought here from all over the state who had already made a name for themselves at regional and national competitions. Among her students were candidates for Master of Sports, winners of championships. But athletic victories are one thing, but education is another. Jessica taught English, which athletes with their terrible training regimen did not need. So Jessica's main task was to somehow buy lessons, tutoring, but to pull the hope of American sports at least for a 3. One Friday night after work, Jessica and her friend in misfortune, Emily, a math major, decided to relax at a night. Why? Young, unmarried, tired of titled, but completely uninterested students. They have a right. They quickly regretted coming. Too loud, too bright. Tired of dancing and shouting and trying to say something, she shoved herself into a far corner, but there was a rumble of noise, and the ubiquitous twirling spotlights were in her eyes. Emily jumped up in front of the table. Don't sit there. We finally got out. She couldn't wait to rush back into the thick of the dance floor. Let's go. I've met so many guys. Cool. Come on, I can't decide who to go with. Emily, can you do this without me? I think I'll go home, I'm tired. What are you talking about? What about home? We'll go somewhere else. Don't go now. Emily, dancing, walked back into the teeming crowd. Jessica wasn't going to wait for her. Clearly, Emily wasn't raring to go home, and there was no stopping her now. In her short dress and high heels, she was just starting to cut loose. Tonight she was the queen of this club, and no force could make her stop now. Let her have her fun. It wasn't often they got such a break from it. Jessica waited for the music to quiet down so she could make her way to the exit through the dancing crowd. Hi, a tall young man stood in front of the table. Can I sit down? Emily has set the pace so fast and I can't take much more. Yeah, sit down. I'm just leaving anyway. Can I come with you? I want some quiet and fresh air. Let's take a little walk. Can I walk with you? That's how Jessica met Michael, her future husband. Nice guy, good manners, nice family, beautiful and properly groomed. Was there love? Of course there was. But somehow, it wasn't intense.
At 17, you can run to the ends of the earth for your beloved in a frenzy of passion. At 25, you need to build a reliable, happy family based on love. And all my girlfriends are already married with children. They said, choose Jessica. Men like you won't be pecking at you anytime soon. They'll find younger ones. Take it as it comes. It was a marriage of convenience, but it wasn't about money and wealth. It was about living happily ever after.
Now in 40 years, more and more often flashed the thought that the calculation was wrong. Maybe it was necessary to wait for a mad and unearthly love and even for a short time, but to see the sky in diamonds and not to live 15 years of calm, prosperous, and happy life, which now flew to all hells. They didn't have children. It didn't work out. Jessica sometimes thought that if they'd had kids, things would have turned out differently. They didn't really want kids. At least Jessica didn't feel bad about it. It would have been nice to have a baby, but no, it wasn't. She never understood the enthusiasm of her friends who grabbed other people's children in their arms and hooted with them. I never felt any emotion at the sight of babies. She must be some kind of a defective. She doesn't like other people's children. If she loved her own, she would know. They don't exist. 2 months ago, Jessica felt that in their family, as in the Danish kingdom, something was wrong. Everything seemed to be the same as always, but there was some kind of reticence. Like Michael had a secret. What secret? They never hid anything from each other. He looked at Jessica with a frozen stare like he couldn't see. Sometimes he seemed to want to say something, but it was as if he hadn't decided if he should. He always worked hard, and if he was late, it never occurred to Jessica to get jealous and throw tantrums. Now she was watching the clock, calculating what time he should be home. If he wasn't home on time, she'd start to worry, to suspect. Of what? Well, what could one suspect a husband of? Cheating, I guess. Although it seemed to Jessica that a cheating husband should behave differently. She didn't know how, but for some reason, she didn't believe in cheating. It was too trivial. There was no other reason for the changed relationship. Michael, what time are you coming over? I don't know, it's a lot of work. You're hardly ever home, you don't tell me anything. It's like I'm not in your life. Jess, are you jealous of me? It's a little late for that, I understand, about 15 years ago. But why now? I thought you know what to do when you're imagining things. Okay, I'm off, Smoochy. He poked Jessica on the cheek, grabbed his keys, and left. That's how we talked. Maybe it was nothing. I made it up, I'm suffering. But a nagging sense of impending misery lingered. No, something's wrong. Something's about to happen. Jessica decided to do something useful, but not her favorite. She had her own system for keeping the house in order. Sure, dusting and scrubbing the floors was a necessity, but she hated general cleaning, never trying to do everything at once. She assigned herself half an hour of family chores. There are community chores, and these are family chores. For example, wash the window, dust the bookcase, put the kitchen shelves in order. It's not a waste of half an hour. And the things I didn't want to do are done. Today was the clothes closet's turn. It was high time to put away the winter stuff, make an inspection of t-shirts and shirts. There's probably something that needs to be thrown out by now. Well, not thrown out, but taken to the country house. They don't throw anything away. First, they take it to the country house, and then, when it's been there for 2 years, it goes straight to the trash. If you have a summer house, there are no trash cans at home. Going through her shirts, Jessica fumbled with something hard in her breast pocket. A photograph. The photo was of Michael and some woman. Jessica had seen this woman somewhere. Only she looked different. She remembered old photos of Michael from his college days showed this woman, but much younger. Jessica hadn't really looked at her husband's old photos, but I think this was the girl she'd seen. She'd have to check. The old albums were stored in the back row of the bookcase. Jessica took out a row of books and pulled out the albums. Spreading the albums out on the table, she looked for a picture she honestly didn't remember very well. Okay, something vague like she'd seen. Jessica didn't even really understand why she was doing this. Well, she'd find a picture of a girl, so what? Only that Michael had met somewhere either a classmate or a classmate and had taken a picture with her, but she kept looking for the picture. She thought she'd find it and learn something very important. She did find it. Here is this girl, beautiful with a bold look with some irrepressible energy which is visible even in the old photo. And next to Michael, look so that it is clear, is not just love. Here is a passion that will sweep away everything in its path, push on any deeds. Something happened there in the distant past, and now it will auction in the prosperous life of Jessica. She didn't just feel it. She knew it for a fact. The doorbell rang. Emily came in. Over the years, Emily had managed to get married twice and have 2 children, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight again, but remain her closest friend. Oh, what's this? Nostalgia. What are you doing in the old stuff? You know, it's just a weird picture. Look, here's Michael and his girlfriend, and here's them, but a long time ago. So what? Maybe this one was taken a long time ago, too. It doesn't look like it. Judging by the age, it's done since a year ago. And the shirt he's wearing is the one I bought. So this girl showed up again not too long ago. He never told me anything about her. He kept the picture in his pocket. Either it was precious, or he was afraid he'd lose it. Or he was afraid I'd see it. Jess, what does that mean? Anything. There's a lot of possibilities. Putting aside the most unpleasant one, the mistress, for example, he met an old love. Well, they took a photo for a good memory, slipped the photo in his pocket and forgot. Inga seems to be trying to calm and cheer up Jessica, offering different options to explain the situation with the photo. And now you can't find a place for yourself and draw horrible pictures of infidelity. By the way, that's also an option. That's exactly how it was planned. I decided to freshen things up, so I planted this picture on you. I wish I had your optimism. What's there to be sad about? It's a tragedy. Even if it's a mistress, it's no big deal. No, you can't forgive, of course. Remember how I kicked my first one out with a kick in the ass? But I didn't forgive him. I hate picking up scraps for someone else. Isn't that cheap? I divorced one idiot, found another. Jessica is at a loss to ask her friend for advice on what she should do now. Emily suggests asking Michael directly who the girl in the photo is. But Jessica doubts her husband will tell the truth since he's been silent and acting strangely so far. She feels things are complicated with this girl from the past. Emily insists that they need to find out the truth, even if bitter, rather than hiding their head in the sand. This leads Jessica to the idea of following her husband, although she realizes that it is ugly and dishonest. But if it's impossible to live any other way, then decency will have to be compromised. Jessica still tried to avoid being followed and asked Michael directly about the girl in the old photo. He seemed to remember that it was a certain Sasha with whom he studied together. But after showing the recent photo, Jessica is waiting for an explanation as to why he was recently dating her and carrying the photo in his pocket. The conversation doesn't seem to have cleared things up yet, and Jessica has to decide if it's really worth following her husband to find out the truth. The issue of trust in their relationship hangs in the air. Well, met by chance. Recognized him. Not in the old photo. Then why did you keep her picture? Jess, I'm sorry, yeah, I know this girl. We had a relationship a long time ago, but that was way before your time. There's nothing to do with us now. Me. How long ago? What's with the interrogation? I don't want to talk like that. I can go out with old friends. I don't have to ask your permission. Sure, honey. Jessica was sitting in her car outside her husband's office, waiting for something. So he'd get out, so he'd drive. He's got a bunch of auto body shops around town. There's no telling where he'd go. I felt like a fool, but I wouldn't leave. Empty at my mind. I had to follow through. Michael came out, got in the car. Okay, let's go. We drove a short distance and stopped at a coffee shop. Michael went into the cafe. Jessica got out of the car and through the glass tried to see who he came to see. There was no one. He was sitting alone at a table. Jessica cursed herself and got ready to leave. And then she saw her, the girl in the picture. She came into the cafe, sat at Michael's table. Judging by the expression on her face and the abrupt gestures, she said something unpleasant to him. Jessica didn't hear the words, but it seemed to her that Michael was trying to explain something. Maybe to persuade or talk him out of something, but the girl cut him off abruptly. No, not lovers. That's not how lovers behave. What kind of secret is it that you can't tell your wife? The girl left the cafe. Jessica followed her. Why? Something had to be done. She saw her go into the driveway and she drove home. She decided she was going to talk to her husband today. No more secrets, no more innuendo. She had to get it all out in the open. Family's falling apart. There's no room for sentimentality. I used to have a relationship with this woman. Okay, who didn't have a relationship before marriage? What's your connection now? Why is she showing up now? What does she want from you? All the questions had been formulated and asked, but there was no one to answer them. Michael didn't come home. This had never happened before. In their entire married life, Michael had never spent the night out of the house. Jessica was used to falling asleep before her husband arrived, but he was always there in the morning. It was unusual, but she didn't feel any anxiety. She called, no answer. Did you call work? No. They hadn't seen him yet. That's when it started to get unsettling. She called all her friends and acquaintances. No, he didn't spend the night at anyone's house. So where did he sleep over? The one in the picture, Jess. Did you call the police? Emily, what am I supposed to do? My husband's run away. Find him and bring him back. You think he ran away? I don't think so. I think there's trouble. We have to look for your husband who's been running away. Go to the police. The police didn't take a report. Well, come back in 3 days. He's out on a bender. You're going straight to the police? Jessica tried to explain that her husband does not go out, always sleeps at home. And if he's missing, it means he's in trouble. She must have been too emotional because the policeman behind the glass suddenly said, I understand your husband. I'd run away from such a wife above the Arctic Circle. Come back in 3 days. Goodbye. 3 days to do nothing, then file a report, then wait for someone to do something. What about Michael? Where is he? What happened to him suddenly doesn't matter. Did he cheat? Did he not cheat? What are his terrible secrets? Michael couldn't leave or run away. He was in trouble. There's no other explanation, and no one's going to find out what happened, so I'd have to do it myself. Jessica had no idea how to do that. The only thing that came to mind was to go to Samantha's house. Jessica remembered the house she lived in. Jessica didn't think Michael could be there, but Samantha would explain what their secrets were. Maybe there was at least a clue as to where he was. There was a girl sitting on a bench in the driveway, rocking a baby in a stroller. Hello. Do you know this woman? Jessica showed me a picture of Samantha. I can't say I do, but I've seen her. Jessica thanked the girl and called Samantha's apartment. No answer. She called again, but no one was there. Another girl came out of the driveway. She lives alone, has a daughter about 10 years old. They live together. Have you seen this man? Jessica showed a picture of Michael. I don't think so. There was a man who came to see her, but not this one. He came by today looking for her too. I live on the first floor. I can see the entrance from the kitchen. So I saw her yesterday. She went out with her daughter and I don't think she came back. Jessica went home, didn't find out anything, no idea what to do next. She dialed Michael again. No answer. There's another girl, 10 years old. If she was 15, I'd think she was Michael's daughter. Then it would make sense what Michael and his ex-lover have in common. But it doesn't make any sense at all. They can't have a 10-year-old daughter in common. There was hope that Michael had come home. But no, he hadn't. Jessica wandered around the empty apartment, then begged for him to come back, then cursed him for doing this to her. That night, her neighbor at the cottage called. Hey, Jess, did you have someone staying at the cottage? No. What's wrong, Aunt Maggie? I saw your lights on. I saw them. Michael came by, but he left almost immediately. Are you sure there's someone in the house? I figured if Michael brought it over, it must be someone he knows. Maybe we should go look. Aunt Maggie, please go and call me back right away. Thank God he's alive. Who did he bring in there? Samantha, I guess. But where the hell did he go? He never came home. And why would Samantha hide out at their summer house? So many questions, no one to answer them. The neighbor called Banks. No, Jess, there's a girl there. She wouldn't open the door, but she said she came with her mom. And now her mom's gone for a little while. Right now, should we call the police? No. Maggie, I think I know who the girl is. I'll be there in the morning. As Jessica drove to the cottage, she couldn't decide how to act. She sees Samantha. And what? Do I ask her outright mistress? And if she was, what would she do? Jessica didn't plan to grab her hair and wrestle her husband back with her fists, nor did she want to leave with her head held high, pretend she'd come by accident. Sure, the husband brought his mistress, and the wife just happened to be passing by. It's like the dumbest joke ever. Okay, I can't think of anything good to say anyway, so we have to act according to the situation. After all, I don't care about Samantha. I need to make sure Michael is okay, Jessica thought. She got out of the car and peered over the fence. The fence was low and not solid. The whole lot was in plain sight. There was a girl sitting at a table under an apple tree. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail, her jeans were a little too big, and she was wearing a plaid shirt. Jessica opened the gate and walked toward the girl. The girl looked up with bright eyes. No fright. Hello. Who are you? I never talk to strangers. Wow. You must have read Hemingway at such a young age. That's a good point. My name is Jessica. This is my cottage, so you're my guest. What's your name? Mary. Mary, are you here all alone? Oh, I'm here with my mom, but she went away for a while yesterday. She's not back yet. Mary, have you seen this man? Jessica showed me a picture of Michael. Of course, that's Uncle Michael. He brought us here, and he came again yesterday. Mom left with him, not hungry. No, the fridge is full. Jessica went inside, looked in the fridge. It was full. Sausage, cheese, yogurt, eggs, vegetables. There's chicken in the freezer. Settled in pretty good. They must have been planning on living here. So where's Samantha gone? We can't leave her here alone, can we? Mary, come with me, and we'll leave a note for Mom. May Schulzen. Let's go, in case Mom doesn't come home tonight. It's scary out here at night. On the way into town, Jessica asked, Mary, where's your daddy? He doesn't live with us. He is a traveler, recently was in Antarctica, and used to work in the circus. He's a magician. Jessica thought the girl chuckled. I see. He traveled to Antarctica and shows tricks to the penguins there. Mary also said that she and her mom often move around. They don't have their own house, but it's even more interesting that way. They lived in Greece for 2 years. Mary liked it there. It was warm and there was a sea, but her mom said she had to go back. So they came. Mom has a friend in town, Josh. Mary remembers where he lives. We should find him. See if he knows where Mom went. Mary, when you went to the cabin, did Mom and Uncle Michael talk about anything? Mom kept saying she was going to go all the way, punish some creep. And Uncle Michael said it was dangerous and we should leave. Well, that's just what I need. Oh, you're in trouble, Michael. What have you done? We're going to have to look for Josh Doe. Maybe he'll clear things up, Jessica thought. Mary showed her the house where Josh lived and said he would be here soon. He always came at the same time. About 10 minutes later, Mary jumped out of the car and, with a shout of Josh, threw herself around the neck of a tall, long-haired young man. Mary, my little monkey, where did you go? Where's Samantha? I haven't been able to find you for 2 days. He doesn't seem to know much either. But we have to try, Jessica decided. May, I'm Jessica. You see, your Samantha didn't go missing alone, but with my husband. And I found Mary at my cottage. I was hoping you could help me figure it out. You know, I'm having such a crazy day today. I drove home with one thing on my mind, something to eat. There's a diner around the corner. Let's sit down, eat, and try to exchange information. Josh knew Samantha before she went to Greece. Knew she was from Atlanta, was Miss Atlanta. Had a mother there, classmates. She didn't go on to college, got married, had a daughter, then divorced. But it was her ex-husband she had a very complicated relationship with. Josh didn't know exactly, but it seemed to him that her ex-husband had hurt Samantha in some way. She hadn't said much about him, nothing specific, but there was a clear hatred mixed with squeamishness. I'd crushed the filthy insect, but I'm disgusted. She'd gone to Greece because she'd been asked to marry there. But the marriage didn't work out, so she came back. It was after she came back that she started acting strange. She was always calling someone, disappearing, throwing jobs at Josh, meeting someone. Josh was happy to help, but he didn't understand how. It's not like she'd let him in on her plans. And now she's missing. And not alone, mind you. I don't understand what my husband has to do with this. We knew each other years ago, but I never heard from her, Jessica said. She's back, and Michael rushed to help her. He was so eager to help her that he forgot to tell me he was leaving. Is she such a femme fatale that men lose their heads and don't remember themselves? You'd lay down your head if she asked you to? No, Jessica, you're thinking in the wrong direction. There's no reason to be jealous. First of all, she has a policy of no relationships with exes. Never go back in the same river. Secondly, I think she loved her Greek. I don't know what happened between them, but she didn't come back the same. If she found your husband after all these years, she must need him for something. She can't do it without him. I wish I knew what she was up to. Wait, couldn't she have gone back to Austin to see her mom? Or even if she did, she wouldn't have left Mary. She wouldn't even think about her mom. Okay, we can't think of anything now. I'm gonna go home, see if I can find out where she lived, who her husband was. Yeah, I'm a lousy friend. It never occurred to me to ask. Well, can you find out? Me. Yeah, I can. Jessica picked up Mary and went home. Interacting with a stranger's child turned out to be quite pleasant. The girl was well-mannered, sociable, well-read, had her own opinion but all expressed it, sometimes very original. Jessie. For some reason, she immediately began to call Jessica. So, without any aunt, do you have children? No. That's what I'm thinking. You have kids, they grow up. You'll find out you shouldn't have had them. You don't know what you're going to have. That's a very radical decision for a 10-year-old girl. A whole philosophy based on some thoughts, on something seen and heard. It sounds strange coming from the mouth of a child, Jessica thought. But otherwise, Mary was a normal and pleasantly not at all capricious child. In the morning, Josh called. No, Jessica, I found out something. I gotta go to Austin. I'm leaving tonight. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll ask around, and then I'll be back. Will you keep an eye on Mary? Sure. What'd you find out? I'm guessing. I'll tell you when I get back. Josh arrived in Austin, and the first thing he did was visit Samantha's mother. Old shabby house with an entryway that looked more like a public restroom. The doors are peeling, the door lock falling out of the door. It's unclear how the door even closes. The bell hanging from the wires certainly doesn't work. It's impossible to imagine Samantha living here. Could anyone really live here at all? Josh knocked on the door, not expecting an answer. Suddenly, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. Her age wasn't even roughly determinable. The apartment smelled so bad it made me want to run away. You can't breathe that air. Asking about Samantha here was pointless, but Josh did ask. Samantha's a bitch. I don't think I've ever seen her before. She left my mom. I don't need my mother. I'm dying here all alone. Or do you even know she's got a daughter growing up? I don't want to know. She's an asshole herself, and her daughter will be the same. She's all grown up now. She's running around with dogs. What? Somebody come looking for Samantha? I did. I told them to get out. She said she'd laid her life on them, and now there's no one to serve her. Free and slip. She remembered the glass, but not the water, Josh muttered. The woman staggered, but held onto the door. Careful not to fall. She turned and staggered back into the apartment. Josh closed the door, pushing hard so it wouldn't open, and ran out of the entryway to get a breath of air. Okay, we talked. What a nightmare, he thought, not expecting this. One thing was certain, Samantha would never come back here. Josh's spirits were low after talking to Samantha's mother. She wasn't in Austin, that much was obvious. No one to come back to. But now that he was here, he had to ask around. See if any secrets from the past came out. Went to Samantha's high school. Her homeroom teacher was there. She had no one to talk to but her students. So she gladly told the nice young man about her former. She was a good girl with talent. It's a pity what happened. She went to a beauty contest for some reason. That's when everything started to fall apart. But she was a pretty girl, so why not be a beauty queen? You saw her mother. She's not just a queen, she'd go straight to the bar just to get out of the house. Lena said that after the beauty contest, Samantha was hit on by some daddy from the sponsors, 20 years older than her. She left with him. What happened next? Lena didn't know. Samantha never came to Austin again. You know, her friend Laura lives here. They'd been in touch somehow. Laura said Samantha called her. Maybe she knows something. The teacher suggested. Nothing concrete again, Josh thought. Although he had already guessed which sponsor he was talking about. He'd learned that Samantha had left Austin with one Michael Lawrence, who was organizing the beauty pageant. He might be Mary's father. Now we have to find Lawrence. But first, we need to talk to Laura, Josh decided. Laura worked at the local hospital. Josh went there. At first, Laura didn't want to talk. She didn't know who this man was or if he might hurt her friend. But Josh turned on all his charm, pressed the fact that Samantha was in danger, and still persuaded his faithful friend. Laura said that after the beauty contest, Samantha was going to leave with Lawrence. Anna was horrified. You're going to live with that asshole. He's old, he's ugly, he's got greasy eyes. What am I supposed to do? Stay with my mom, get away from her and live on your own. But Lawrence is worse than your mother. He'll ruin your life, get you into this shit. No, then no. You don't talk. Laura didn't know anything more about Lawrence, but she could feel it, see it. A collector of pretty young fools. Samantha was just another miss to him. But for Samantha, Lawrence was a pass to a new life, and she had spit on everything and left. Laura's surprise was unprecedented when Samantha announced that they were married. Family life had become a dictatorship. You couldn't take a step aside. Endless humiliation, beatings, and total control. How did Samantha manage to have an affair with Michael? It's a mystery, Josh pondered. Michael didn't know that Samantha was married. He fell in love and didn't understand why his beloved would disappear for days at a time, unwilling to move in with him. So mysterious, with a lot of secrets. Lawrence solved all the mysteries quickly. When Samantha said she wanted to leave Lawrence, he didn't object. If you want to go, go, but go where I tell you to go. And locked Samantha up in a mental institution for 2 years. After leaving the asylum, Samantha took a long time to regain consciousness, and when she woke up, she realized she was pregnant. She gave birth to Mary. She didn't care about her life for a long time, but she couldn't imagine her daughter living with this monster. Samantha filed for divorce, grabbed Mary, and ran away. Either Lawrence wasn't omnipotent or he was fed up with his stroppy wife, but they got the divorce. Samantha was afraid that Lawrence would not leave them alone, so she kept moving, calling Laura from different parts of the country. Finally, 3 years ago, she announced that she had found her happiness, fell in love, was going abroad, and that Lawrence would not bother her there. Sometimes she called, even by video link. Laura could hear Samantha sparkling with happiness and was genuinely happy for her friend, and then she called hysterically, screaming, "I'm going to kill that bastard once and for all. He will answer for everything." I did not really understand, but it seems that Lawrence sent her lover photos of beaten Samantha in the asylum and wrote that he was going to marry a vicious woman. And in the photos where Samantha was drugged, with a glazed look, she really looked terrible. Apparently, Heroes, the Greek believed, was afraid to connect fate with such a person or was not so much in love. Anyway, Samantha had to grab her daughter again and leave. That's all I know. I haven't called again, and thank you, Laura. That clears things up. If he shows up, give me a call. Josh called Jessica, said he couldn't find out anything more in Austin. And he'll be home tomorrow morning. No, Josh, you're coming straight to my place. You'll tell me everything. But if you feed me breakfast, I'll come straight to you from the train. In the morning, Jessica was awakened by the doorbell. Woke her up at the moment when she was dreaming of something nasty and disturbing. She had no strength to wake up and open her eyes. It's a good thing they woke her up. It must be Josh, Jessica thought, but it was Ingrid. Aren't you answering your phone? Michael's here? No, she came in like a hurricane. Her energy hadn't diminished over the years. Emotions are running high. Don't yell. The baby's sleeping. Grace. What baby? Where did you get a baby? Let's go to the kitchen. Have some coffee and I'll tell you all about it. I've got breakfast to make. Josh will be here in a minute. He eats so much, I'm afraid I can't feed him. Jessica could hardly contain her laughter. Ingrid's amazed face was so funny. I'm sorry, and I'll just get you a coffee. I didn't have time to go to the store. A man needs to be fed. No offense, girlfriend. Jessica couldn't take it anymore and laughed. Come on, I'll find you a sandwich too. Before Josh arrived, Jessica had just enough time to tell him where the girl and the man had come from. Ingrid utade in a Haiti. Jessica thought she was more interested in who Josh was than anything else in the story. You're not getting married for the third time, are you? Looking for a candidate. She joked. Josh arrived, tired, hungry, upset. Everything I'd learned didn't help me figure out where Samantha and Michael were, Josh summarized. Knowing Samantha's character, I fear that she's decided to take revenge on Lawrence. Self-hatred and fear for her daughter might have pushed her to rash actions. It's too expensive to compete with Lawrence, Ingrid said. He's in the upper echelon of show business. Rich, famous, surrounded by stars and the right people. Invulnerable and all-powerful. You can't get to him. And if you do, it's a head-scratcher. Ex-wife is not the kind of character he'd feel sorry for. He'll either kill her or put her away. What happens to Mary then? It's interesting that everyone's worried about Samantha and Mary. Does anyone wonder what will happen to Michael? Jessica grinned bitterly. No one cares. It's his own fault, I see. I shouldn't have gotten involved in someone else's story. But if I did, I'd like to see him get out of it unscathed. But at least alive, Jessica didn't know how to deal with her husband when he came back. Or rather, if he did. What kind of love was so abnormal if after all these years he spits on her prosperous family life and gets involved in some adventure? Samantha may not be going into the same river. Michael, on the other hand, seems to be hoping for something. There's no other explanation, she thought bitterly. Does he intend to go back to Jessica? If so, how? Will he come and, without explaining or telling her anything, go on with his normal life as if nothing had happened? Does he think he can do that? Ingrid wondered. Jessica didn't know if she wanted her husband back. The only thing she wanted now was for him to be alive. We'll see. Our detective work has reached a dead end, Josh stated. Samantha's secrets are solved. Michael has no secrets. Where do we go from here? Josh felt that the only way forward was to dig into Lawrence's life. If something unforeseen, unpleasant for him had happened in the last few days, it was likely that our vigilantes had sprung into action as soon as possible. They must be stopped before the trouble happens. I'm going to go home now, get some sleep, and find out what Lawrence is up to, what's going on. Josh, who are you? If you can find out what the powerful are up to. Ingrid was clearly interested in the young man. I'm not a big bird myself, Josh answered modestly. But I have a few friends, including some from the world of show business who I think may be aware of Lawrence's affairs. If I hear anything, I'll call you, Josh added. Don't hurt Mary. She's a good girl. Josh left, and Jessica and Ingrid were left to ponder what kind of revenge Samantha had planned, trying it on for size. What would you do if your husband ruined your life? Ingrid asked. Well, I'd probably do nothing. I'd try to forget it like a bad dream, replied Jessica, and I'd definitely take revenge. How can you send your current wife a photo of you with your mistress? You can put your story in the press, ruin your image. But it's all kind of petty, toothless, Ingrid sighed. She didn't have the imagination for anything else. Jessica enjoyed spending the day with Mary. They went to the mall and bought Mary some clothes. She didn't even have any pajamas and only one shirt. They went to a cafe, had ice cream, then bought groceries and went home to make lunch or dinner. Josh was supposed to be here with news, and Ingrid, of course, would not stay home. While cooking dinner and talking to Mary, Jessica couldn't get the thought of her husband out of her head. Angry, of course, but even angrier at the unknown Samantha. Revenge on an ex-husband is probably fair, but why bring my Michael into it? She thought bitterly. But how can you not think about how your gamble will turn out for other people? For Michael and Jessica, Josh and friend Laura see Samantha as an innocent victim, hurt and humiliated. Jessica didn't see it that way. She developed a very different image of herself over the days. Bold, bossy, unforgiving of insults and insults, willing to go to extremes. Surely there was something to avenge Lawrence. But Jessica also questioned the extent of his guilt. The ease with which Samantha had put other people's lives on the line, including her own daughters, was astonishing. In the evening, they gathered the council, and Josh laid out what they'd learned. Lawrence was really getting into trouble. A seemingly small thing at first. His young wife, an aspiring singer whom no one had heard yet, had been sent a photo of her husband having fun with his mistress. The mistress is even younger and, apparently, even more eager to become a star. Otherwise cannot explain the popularity of the old worldly daddy of young girls. But the young wife turned out to be wise beyond her years. She didn't want Lawrence's love. She didn't marry for that until he made a singer out of her. No divorce is out of the question. She didn't notice the affair, and there was no scandal. If Samantha did it, the first blow missed. The second one was much more serious. Lawrence's production center was churning out stars like pies. Not a year without a star. If they're making stars, somebody wants them. It was needed by sponsors who invested a lot of money and wanted a lot of money in return. Their indignation was not limited when they learned that most of the money Lawrence spends not on the promotion of stars, but on himself, his favorite. These were not empty words. They were presented with documents and proof of how much and on what was spent. The production center was cracking at the seams. Sponsors demanded Lawrence return the money, and the underachieving stars realized that fame was passing them by. Apparently, Samantha had been preparing this blow for a long time and disappeared when she was ready to deliver it. Realized that the collapse of Lawrence's career will not forgive her. Oh my God, what was she hoping for? That Lawrence would bitch and not find out who started? Now Jessica was horrified. But the worst part was that Michael would be the one to retaliate. She no longer doubted that he was involved. It was unlikely he was helping Samantha get information not his level, but he was hiding it from Lawrence. That was a fact. No, Jess, don't panic. Josh saw that Jessica was on the verge of a breakdown. We're not even sure what Samantha did. Somewhere she must have gotten those documents, and her entourage. I haven't found any people working at the Lawrence Center, although I don't know much about her at all, Josh added. Ingrid entered the room with a cup of coffee. Jess, do you have anything stronger? Coffee's a little hard to get through in here. She must have realized that Lawrence was going to retaliate now. Did she really think she'd spend the rest of her life in hiding? I don't see what she stands to gain by raising Lawrence to the ground now. On the contrary, he is now her personal enemy, Ingrid wondered. Was revenge so much in her eyes that she did not think of Mary? I don't understand why she didn't think of her daughter either. Josh seemed to doubt Samantha's infallibility. Let's have a drink. Jessica put the cognac on the table. Explain to me what to do. My husband is missing, by the way. It's been 3 days, but there's no point in going to the police. As it turned out, he's not missing, but ran away with some inadequate girl involved in some strange affairs. So what do I do? Everyone sat silent, drinking, thinking. Ingrid thought it was necessary to wait for Michael's return. He'll be back someday. He'll explain everything. Josh wanted to find Samantha's informants to see where she got her information. How much truth there was out there. Lawrence will lie low now, but he'll surface later. Sooner rather than later. Good things like this don't sink. We need to understand the extent of the damage and assess how angry he is. What kind of retaliation might be necessary? Jessica had her own plan. To meet with Lawrence and get his opinion of Samantha, his assessment of all the events. She suspected that Lawrence had a completely different perspective on what had happened. Jessica summarized. It was agreed. Ingrid would stay home and look after Mary. What if Michael showed up? Josh finds out how badly Lawrence was hurt and what the threat to Samantha is. Jessica makes direct contact with Lawrence and tries to find out what he thinks about Samantha and recent events. Truthfully, how to get close to the producer, she didn't know. He's not likely to open up about his personal life to the first woman he meets. Now, why don't you pretend to be a journalist? Josh suggested it. That would be the worst. He's as scared as hell of journalists these days, Ingrid objected. Maybe you're Samantha's lawyer and you want to settle before the trial. Josh came up with an idea. First of all, no one was suing. Second, having a lawyer is practically an admission of guilt, and we're not sure that it was Samantha who attacked Lawrence. Jessica countered. He's got plenty of well-wishers without her. Maybe he's not even thinking about her and we'll hand him the guilty party on a silver platter. Then he'll be all over her, Ingrid concluded, unable to think of anything. Jessica drove to the Lawrence Center. The main thing is to see him, and the rest will follow, she decided. As expected, she couldn't get past the guards. Not surprisingly, in light of recent events, Mr. Lawrence doesn't see anyone. No new projects, no appointments either. So barricaded. It's impossible to get through. Okay, let's go the other way, Jessica thought. She knew what Lawrence looked like. The media personality scandal was all over the TV channels. Is he going to come out of the center someday? Clearly, they won't let him near me. I have to think of a way to get his attention, to say something, so that Lawrence will realize it's in his best interest to talk to me. She sat on the bench in front of the office, fretting, trying to think of the right phrase to get Lawrence's attention. She had several options. But when Lawrence appeared in the doorway, she was suddenly confused, and everything she'd thought of went out of her head. He was walking toward the car, and now he would get in and drive away. She had to say something. Jessica rushed to the car and shouted, "Lawrence, tell me about Samantha. She's going to ruin my husband." The guards rushed toward her, but Lawrence suddenly stopped them. He looked at Jessica carefully and waved his hand, beckoning her over. When she approached, he asked, Do you know Samantha?" "No, I've never seen her." "What does this have to do with my husband?" "He left with her. Why don't you get in the car and we'll talk?" "Don't worry, I don't eat beautiful women for lunch." Jessica knew her value and had long ago realized how it worked on men. But now a chill ran down her spine. She felt scared and a little creepy. She was scared, but she couldn't back down, so she got into the car. "May, take it easy. After all, I'm not the one who came to see you. You're the one who wants something from me," Lawrence said. "I want to know about Samantha. I know her version of events from her friend's words, but I don't believe it too much. I want to understand what my husband's gotten himself into. Now, I want to hear your side of the story." "What's your husband's name?" "Michael." "Me. Where is he now?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. I'm truly sorry if your husband got involved with Samantha. Nothing good can come of it for you or him." Guns approached the driver. "No, Walter, the girl and I are having a serious conversation. Not the car version. Let's go to the restaurant." "What's your name, really?" "What's ours?" "And, Jessica." "You know Jessica, I probably should have told you this a long time ago. I didn't want to be a pain in the ass. I'll tell you, I feel sorry for you and for myself. I'm tired of being the bad guy. Believe it or not, it's up to you. But maybe confessing to a villain will help you. For some reason, I want to help you. I didn't expect myself to be so sentimental. I hope I won't regret it. And I hope I don't have to tell you it's not for the press." At the restaurant, Lawrence was greeted like a regular. "Me, here's your table as usual." "For Jessica, would you like anything?" "No, I'm not here to eat." "Go ahead." Lawrence's version was radically different from what Jessica had heard. The only thing they had in common was that they met in Austin at a beauty pageant. Samantha immediately figured out on whom the title of queen depends and did everything to get this title. She was not embarrassed by the age of the prince and his frankly shabby appearance. She wanted to escape from the family, and Lawrence was the springboard. He himself didn't realize how she'd spun him. He'd seen so many in his bed that another one seemed like a passable option. But that wasn't the case. Samantha had a beastly grip. The producer couldn't break free. After all, you have to get married, and the image of a married man will play into the hands. The girl is beautiful, not stupid. Let it be her. If I had known how it would end, I would have married a fool. Lawrence grinned bitterly. He began cheating on Samantha almost immediately. Lawrence knew about it, but asked him not to make it public. He knew perfectly well that married to a young girl, it was foolish to demand fidelity. He does not need fidelity. He needs a beautiful picture of a happy family life of a famous producer. Am I asking too much for the money I'm giving you? You could have portrayed a happy wife. He resented. Samantha, a little imitation, and then went off the rails. Michael was the first call. Before him, there were many young and different. but it was all entertainment. But Michael was serious. She even talked about divorce. Lawrence didn't object. He was sick of it. He just asked her to wait a little longer. He was finishing up a project. Didn't want to give the press a reason to gossip. I thought it was settled. But apparently, there was someone else besides Michael. Lawrence noticed that Samantha began to behave inadequately. She sleeps all day, then cries, then pounces on him with fists. Strange behavior was increasingly conspicuous. What is most unpleasant? Not only Lawrence, whose worst fears had come true. Samantha was taking drugs. Lawrence panicked, couldn't let the news get out. He treated her in secret, so God forbid anyone found out. He took his wife to an expensive closed hospital, which kept the secrets of clients more than an... Samantha was treated well there. She came back completely sane, behaved herself. If she had cheated, Lawrence didn't know it now. He didn't need anything else. We live normally, we observe decency and all right, he reasoned. When Samantha announced that she was pregnant, he calmed down. Everyone's calmed down. She will give birth to a child, at least some time to stay at home. Look, and everything will improve, hoped Lawrence. But it wouldn't. In vain he hoped. Immediately after Mary's birth, Samantha's mission accomplished sign lit up in front of her. Nothing was holding her back anymore. She threw tantrums, screaming that she didn't want to live with such an ugly, fat, disgusting man. Well, if you don't want to, don't live. All fed up, break up. Lawrence decided. He bought an apartment, deposited a huge sum of money, and got divorced. Michael, wait. Something does not add up. Interrupted him, Jessica. If she had an apartment, why was she traveling all over the country? Why was she hiding from you? Very original hiding, Lawrence grinned. Calling from everywhere, yelling that I'd put her and her daughter in another hole, demanding money. I sent more than what I'd left in the divorce and had already transferred. Over the years, you could live in your own villa somewhere in the Maldives. Why did you send the pictures to Greece? Jessica asked. I didn't send anything, Lawrence said. I was glad she had settled down. I hoped she'd stay there longer. I was willing to keep paying to get her off my back. But I guess she showed her true colors there too. The Greeks kicked her out. Back in the States, Samantha took revenge on Lawrence, but he didn't know why. Whether she hired detectives or many friends, she tracked down Lawrence and his mistress. The new young wife was unimpressed by the news. She's got her own nose to the grindstone. And she wasn't interested in Lawrence as a man, only as a sponsor. Where and with whom he partied, it didn't matter. When Samantha got to the financial documents, Lawrence was angry. Why bite the hand that feeds you? If I go broke, Samantha will be out of money too. At least think of your daughter, he resented. Lawrence tolerated cheating and everything else. But when his life's work was at stake, there was no room for pity. He was determined to stop Samantha. Sure, she's messed up my life, but it's not critical. I'm not an invertebrate amoeba that's so easy to snack on. I'll get my name and influence back, Lawrence pondered. I haven't figured out what to do about Samantha yet. I know where your husband is. He really is with her. But don't be frightened. I'm not going to do anything to them. I'm not a gangster from the 90s. I have no beef with Michael at all. Samantha's always had a way with men. I'm a case in point. But I don't know how to stop her. I can't lock her up in a hospital. Wait, Michael, but she's got your daughter with her. What's going to happen to her? Jessica asked worriedly. I never believed she was my daughter. But it doesn't matter. I'm her father on paper. I have no other children. And Mary is a wonderful girl. Hey, did you have any contact with her? Mary was little, and her mom was traveling around, and sometimes she'd leave her with me for a month or two. When Mary got older, Samantha stopped leaving her. I guess she was afraid I'd refuse to take her back someday. Somehow I'd have to explain to the girl who I was. So don't worry about Mary. I'll be happy to have her live with me, Lawrence said. Jessica's head was spinning. She did not know who to believe. In front of her sat an old, ugly, and unhappy man with tired eyes. A lot of work, a lot of money, and no happiness in the past or in the future. Could she trust him? Somehow she believed he wouldn't hurt Michael. He doesn't want Michael. He'd let him go. But what about Samantha? Or is Lawrence not telling the truth? Why would he? He could just not tell his story to a woman he doesn't know. Or is Samantha really sick? You don't make up a creepy husband story like that in your right mind. Michael, I'm not asking what you're going to do. You're not going to tell me. But one last question. Why did you marry again to a young poor girl with ambition, who sees in you only a bag of money? Jessica asked. You can't believe that she loves you. Why do you have to go through this again? Jessica wondered. No, the rake. It's not the same, Lawrence grinned. My present wife does not love me, of course. I know all about myself and look in the mirror. But it's not Samantha. Just a young, stupid hick who wants fame. As soon as success looms, she'll dump me and never remember me again. Yet smart and calculating Samantha goes a long way. The truth is, I'm beginning to think Samantha's not well. I don't know why she's getting back at me. It's like a mania. She's always had a lot on her mind. But now her cockroaches are just running wild. Jessica felt sorry for the poor man. Money really isn't everything, she thought. Yes, he's not white and fluffy, but he's not a villain who gets his ex-wife. It seemed to Jessica that he felt sorry for his wife, albeit ex-wife, and his daughter, albeit not his own. Jessica had heard everything she wanted to hear. She didn't know where Michael was, but she knew he was safe. No, so he'd be back soon. Okay, we'll meet him, Jessica said, as she was about to leave. But Lawrence suddenly said, Jessica, you are a very beautiful woman. I was looking at you and thinking, do you know where I've seen you? I know, in an old French movie. You're not from here. You're from over there. Don't be frightened. I'm not going to charm you. You're not my type. I guess it's none of my business, but Michael's out of your league too. He's not worthy of you. How many years have you wasted on him? Isn't that enough? There's still time for you to be happy. Do you really love him? I'm sorry to be so frank. You don't love him. Then why do you love him? Look at me. You're looking at a man who thinks he can live without love. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Be happy. Ashrika was leaving, he said to her. Remember, my story mustn't get out. If anything appears in the press, I'll know you did it. You're the only person I've ever spilled my guts to. I warn you, if you do, I'll be your personal enemy. It was harsh and demanding. Jessica drove home in the morning, replaying the information in her head. It didn't make sense. Now Josh was going to say that Samantha was the victim of a tyrant husband. Jessica didn't believe that anymore. He's not a tyrant, just an unhappy man who makes money but realizes he can't buy happiness with it. I feel sorry for him, but I pity myself even more. I've spent half my life trying to build a happy family, and where is it? Some lunatic lured Michael in and he ran after her, forgetting he had a family. Well, that's a family that's worthless. It's time to take my head out of the sand, Jessica pondered. The house was packed. They sat worried, blaming themselves for letting Jessica go alone. They were terribly glad that she had returned alive and unharmed. Jessica carefully, without elaboration, spilled all the information. As expected, Josh didn't believe it. Jess, you're a smart woman. How could he woo you so quickly? Josh, what do you know besides what Samantha said about herself? Her friend Lena, who believes Samantha is the victim of a tyrant husband, hasn't seen her either. You can say anything on the phone. How do you check? I'm not saying that everything Lawrence said is true, but the image of your infallible Samantha has gotten a little fuzzy, Jessica said. Ingrid, sensing the growing disagreement, quickly intervened. Nice break. What are you arguing about? If I understand correctly, there are no complaints about Michael. Then Casanova will be here soon. We'll ask him. But when you think about it, your Samantha is kind of weird. Don't you think so, Josh? Josh didn't say anything, but he didn't deny it. Samantha was a friend, of course, and he was willing to help her. But lately, he wished she'd go away. I'm not refusing to help. Distance is not an obstacle, he thought. They agreed that Michael was safe and would be back soon. Samantha was lying a lot, but Lawrence wasn't going to take revenge on her. Everything seemed fine, but Jessica didn't care about Michael or Samantha. She didn't know what to do with her life. Had she loved Michael when she got married? Of course she did. He was so handsome. Her heart sank, the thin, intelligent face, the suave manners. Now Jessica was asking herself, is this enough for a happy life? Well, you're so wise now. And then such questions did not occur to you. Yes, if youth knew. And it's too early to talk about old age. Well, amateur detectives. Any thoughts on what to do next? Jessica asked. No, I don't. It's a dead end. I mean, it's all so clear, but what's the point? I don't know where Samantha is. Why isn't Michael coming back? It doesn't make sense, the other said. Jessica wanted to lie down and think. The wisest thoughts come to her before she sleeps. Dear guests, don't you have to go? She hinted. Ingrid and Josh didn't object. Now, yes, it's time, they said, and hurriedly got ready. Wow, I missed something. Ingrid, what a bitch. How did she get here so fast? She's always been like that though, and no one can keep up, Jessica thought. She lay down, but she couldn't sleep. She thought about her life. It was strange to think of her life with Michael as something that had passed. She had never imagined living without him. Now I'd have to get used to it. It was terribly depressing. When he came back, he'd probably explain everything, apologize. But Jessica wouldn't be able to live with him, to pretend that nothing had happened. She can't. She'll always remember the betrayal. I wonder if he'll tell the truth or lie. Jessica pondered. Michael showed up the next day. He came over, kissed her cheek carelessly, looked into her eyes, tried to understand what was waiting for him and how to behave. Hey, Jess, I'm sorry. I had a work emergency. I had to leave, and I broke my phone accidentally, so I couldn't call. Okay, I'm gonna lie. Of course, no one has a phone but yours, Jessica said sarcastically. Michael, before you tell a bunch of lies, I want to tell you that I've been looking for you. I was at the cottage. I know about Samantha. Her daughter's sleeping in the bedroom. How'd you leave that girl alone? Samantha never remembered her until now. Also, keep in mind that I saw Lawrence. He told me his side of the story. So without humiliating yourself by lying, why do you care so much about Samantha that you got involved in a murky story and weren't afraid to lose your family? Michael must have come up with some story that was convenient for him, but Jessica messed up his plans, and he had no choice but to tell the truth. It's unclear how much she knows, but it's dangerous to get caught in a lie. I don't know how to explain it, Michael began. When I saw her, I knew I couldn't say no. I knew she was dragging me into something bad, but she needed help. You know, it was like a spell, like hypnosis. She was so convincing about Lawrence's abuse, or so his meanness. I didn't even doubt it was true. The only thing I could do was try to talk it out, to dismiss it. I was afraid it would be worse. Well, to be perfectly honest, I chickened out. I knew it would be bad for me too. Samantha showed up when she got back from Greece. We saw each other occasionally. She told me more and more details about Lawrence's abuse. Michael believed her. His heart broke with pity for the fragile, unhappy, unjustly accused of all the sins of a woman. Michael was eager to help, rushing to every call. Then he got tired of rushing. More and more often flashed the thought that before her appearance he lived a normal, quiet life and would not mind return to such a life. But now Samantha wouldn't let go, calling, sobbing, demanding help. The last call was hysterical. Her husband had figured out where she lived. She had to run, but she had nowhere to go. Michael rushed to Samantha's apartment. She was frantically shoving things into her bag, pushing her daughter. Hurry, 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 hurry. He'll be here any minute. I've got so much dirt, he won't get away with it. He'll answer for everything. Mary, don't poke around. Put those toys down. Come on, let's go. As Michael drove them to the cottage, Samantha talked excitedly about how she would exact revenge on Lawrence. Michael tried to talk her out of it, begging her to give it up. It was too dangerous. Different weight classes. If you piss Lawrence off, he'd retaliate in a way that would be devastating. Samantha couldn't hear, screaming that no one understood how much she'd suffered at the hands of this man. For a moment, Michael thought she wasn't quite right. She kept saying Lawrence was stalking her, but in the time he'd been with her, Michael had never seen him, not even a phone call. On the contrary, it seemed as if Samantha was stalking her ex-husband, some kind of obsessive stalking. It's unclear who's after whom, Michael continued. Tired of Samantha's inadequacy, he tried to convince her to leave. He promised to find a safe place. Now, if there's no money to move, I will. That's the kind of money he offered. Jessica laughed. The laugh was hearty and a little hysterical. The money she'd scraped out of Lawrence was enough for 3 lifetimes. You'll never make that much. Jess, please stop humiliating me. I know I was a fool to fall for it. I don't know what it was. It was an obsession. Yeah, it was an obsession. Hypnosis. The evil eye. Isn't that a little too mystical? What kind of hypnosis did you forget about me under? Do you have any idea what I went through when you disappeared? I was sure you were in trouble. I was ready to tear up those policemen who sneered at me. They said your husband was out and would come back. I didn't think you'd just run off with your mistress. Why did you come back? Did not like living with a crazy woman? Jessica continued. Nay, Jess, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Keep talking. Why didn't you leave her at the cottage? You knew by then she was safe. Let her live. You could have come home and told me everything. Didn't you ever think of that simple option? That's what I was going to do, but it didn't work out. I didn't get home in time, Michael explained. Samantha called again and demanded that I go back to the cottage. She said that I had to go to some acquaintances who had obtained material on Lawrence. They're willing to leak it online, but they need to be paid. We have to do it now, so Lawrence will be unstoppable. Why he obeyed again, Michael did not understand. But he turned around and drove to the cottage. Samantha was already at the fence. She jumped into the car. "Let's go," she commanded. Michael was still trying to appeal to her maternal sensibilities. "Who's the girl gonna stay with?" Michael didn't listen. They drove for a long time. Samantha was agitated and impatient. "All the time pushing Michael," she said with gloating. "That's it, he's finished. That's it now." As they were thrashing around, it was scary. Samantha's behavior seemed too strange to Michael. At some point, he had a sense of unreality about what was happening. He couldn't believe he was participating in this absurdity. "What am I doing here? Why am I doing this?" he thought. When they arrived, Samantha told Michael to wait and walked into the entryway. He sat waiting, lost track of time, didn't realize how long he had been here. But for some reason, he wouldn't leave. He remembered Jessica, tried to think of how he would explain himself to her. There was a longing in his soul, and he wanted to leave everything and return to his quiet, happy life. Despair was setting in. Michael realized that his life would never be the same. But he didn't leave. He waited. He woke up when he realized that he had been sitting for hours. He called Samantha, but she didn't answer. So Michael got out of the car, stood, walked over, and went into the driveway. Where to find Samantha, he had no idea. He decided to knock on all the doors one by one. A grandmother who looked like a fairy flower with pink hair slowly descended the stairs. She was followed by a small dog that looked just like her, only not pink. Michael still dared to ask her if she had seen the girl in the light-colored jacket and where she might have gone. "Young man, even if I seem strange to you, you could have said hello. I haven't seen your girlfriend, but there is one apartment on the 5th floor where many people go in but few come out. Look for her there," she replied. "Who the hell is she, a witch?" Michael thought as he walked up to the 5th floor. He didn't even have to think about which door was which. One was half open. Entering, he found himself in a narrow hallway with flickering lights and peeling wallpaper. As he walked further down, he saw a large room with about 10 people in it. Some sitting, some lying down, and some walking back and forth. No one paid Michael any attention, as if he didn't exist. A kind of looking glass opened before him. Michael had never seen such a place before, but he immediately recognized the essence of what was happening. He tried to see who could be Samantha. He found her, picked her up in his arms, and headed for the exit. The others showed no interest in who was being carried, where they were being carried. Their gazes were blank, as if they saw nothing around them. Putting Samantha in the back seat of the car, Michael got behind the wheel and realized he didn't know where he was going. Probably to the hospital. But if Samantha was taken there, he would be locked up in a treatment facility. What would become of Mary then? And what would happen to him when Samantha found out that he was the one who sent her there? Without medical attention, she could die. Michael dialed the number of a doctor he knew, gave the address of Samantha's last refuge, and drove to the location. The doctor arrived quickly, treated Samantha, gave her shots, put her on an IV, and said that the patient needed constant supervision. He took a fee for his services and left. Michael was left alone. Sitting next to a nearly motionless Samantha, he thought about how it was that his life had descended to this. He wished he could get rid of all his troubles and go back to his wife. It was clear to him that Jessica was unlikely to forgive him. He wondered how he'd gotten himself into all this. At first, old feelings flared up. After all, he remembered how strong love had once been. Then came the desire to prove himself a hero, the savior of his beloved from the encroachments of the villain. When he realized that the princess was independent enough to fend for herself, it was too late to change anything. He found himself too deeply involved in the situation. He would have continued to sit next to Samantha, tormented by thoughts of rescue. But suddenly there was a call from Lawrence. Not to Michael, of course, but to Samantha. But Michael answered. Silently, without explanation, Lawrence said that Michael could be out. He would look after Samantha himself. Michael didn't object. He left the place in a hurry, and there he was, standing there so familiar and close. He's back. First he left her, now Samantha. I can see why he left Samantha. Things had gotten too tense, too tiring. Tired of having to sacrifice himself. I longed to return to my youth, to relive the vivid feelings, but I couldn't. A life of mixed fantasies was too disturbing. What was wrong with Jessica? Jessica looked at Michael with difficulty, and inside her flared the desire to strike him in his graceful, cultured face. The face that had always been so neat, to make his appearance distorted with pain, to make him cease to be attractive, to make her have no desire to admire him, no desire to rejoice in his return. Wanted to rid herself of any warm feelings for him. He didn't deserve it, but she held back. I didn't hit him. Michael didn't even realize how deeply he'd hurt her. How could he do that? He didn't think about how much it hurt her, how skillfully he'd packaged his anger in an attractive shell. Look how honest I've been. I didn't lie. I came and told her the truth. And now he's standing there looking at me and doesn't understand what the problem is. After all, he came back, told everything, repented, even asked for forgiveness. Jessica should have forgiven him as a sign of gratitude for the fact that he came back and felt pity for her poor husband, who had been through so much. She should have thrown herself into his arms with tears in her eyes, stroked his head and assured him that everything terrible was over and everything would be all right. Jessica stood motionless, her gaze glassy, sending shivers down Michael's spine. She was silent, and he couldn't understand her thoughts. Obviously, a quick reconciliation scene with a happy resolution was not going to work out. Michael decided to wait it out. He hadn't even considered the idea that Jessica wouldn't forgive him, not now or ever in the future. And Jessica's only wish seemed to be that this man was never around again, that he would leave and never show up again. "Will you please leave now?" she said, trying to remain calm. "What do you mean, leave? Where am I going?" Michael didn't understand. "Get out of here. Go away. Get out," shouted Jessica, already desperate. Michael was stunned. Never before had he seen his tactful and calm wife in such a furious state. He was scared and confused. Michael realized it was time to leave before her condition turned into a full-blown tantrum. He couldn't imagine how this explosion of emotion might end, and he didn't want to find out. "Okay, I'll stay at the cottage for now. Then we'll talk," he said as he made his way outside. When the door closed behind Michael, Jessica couldn't hold back any longer and burst into tears. Mary, peering into the room fearfully, cautiously walked over and hugged her. "Jessica, do you want me to get you some tea? You cry for a while and I'll put the kettle on," she offered affectionately. Something clenched in Jessica's heart. Perhaps for the first time she realized that she wished she had a child, someone to help her cope with the pain and give her the strength to go on living. But right now, she felt alone. Jessica tried to do something to take her mind off the pain, but the tears wouldn't stop flowing. It was like she was trying to cry out all the loneliness and pain of the last few days. Mary, without imposing, came in from time to time to see if everything was all right, realizing that Olga needed space. In the evening, Emily's friend came in and, seeing Jessica's condition, picked her up in a friendly manner and took her into the kitchen. While Jessica sat there, Emily quickly set the table, poured a shot of cognac and asked her friend to drink, trying to support her in some way and help her overcome her grief. "Okay, well, now eat and tell me about it," Emily suggested. Barely holding back tears, Jessica began the story of her husband's return. "Emily, tell me, do men think differently? He told me everything. Look, I still don't understand what happened, and I can see he's not faking it. He really doesn't understand. Can I live with him? Look, friend, divorce is not a disaster," Emily reassured her. "I'm speaking as someone who's been through it. Don't rush to make a decision on emotion. When we were young, we were all categorical, but now sometimes compromise seems to be the best solution. Everything needs to be well thought out and stop crying," Emily said very warmly. "In my case, compromise is not an option," Jessica countered. "After all, I don't love Michael. Or maybe I never have. Do you think it's because of him that I'm crying? No, I'm crying for me. I feel sorry for myself. How ridiculous my life has been. No love, no children. Now no husband." Jessica drowned in her self-pity, tears flowing. "Friends exist to support you, to tell you that you are a good girl, to wipe away your tears and add a little cognac." That's what they did. Gradually, the dialogue descended to the usual complaints of resentful women. "We are so beautiful and smart, we earn our own money, but we are not lucky in our personal lives. Where do men look? And in fact, where are these men? I guess they are no longer around." The conversation continued along the well-known route. How bad men are and how unfair life is to them. Here I am, a fool admired, always for a great love, married in for life. But you chose Michael for his reliability, stability, and the chance to live without concussions. Was I wrong? Did you miss something about him? Or is it your own fault? He'd come to believe that I wouldn't go anywhere, that I'd keep everything simple. In the end, he became the husband I raised him to be. So what? We're going to blame ourselves now. You're not the one who got involved with the ex. No, you left when you realized she wasn't herself. You didn't get involved in a risky venture to ruin Lawrence, Emily said indignantly. And you didn't decide that despite having a family, she was the one to save. Come to your senses, friend, and stop defending that scoundrel. Maybe you're even thinking of forgiving him. You can try, but it won't do you any good. It's scary to be alone at 40, isn't it? Isn't it scarier to look him in the eye every day, expecting another betrayal, than about being alone? You know I have some thoughts, she added. Are you out of your mind or what? What options are there in my position? Jessica interjected. We'll see about that, Emily exclaimed confidently. I myself once thought there was no choice, but it turns out there is. Inga was talking with such gusto about Josh's charms, his politeness, his intelligence, his beauty, that Jessica realized that her friend had been carried away again. How can you believe after a couple days of knowing him that he's the one for you? He didn't teach you the first time, and now it's like a fresh start again, into everything in the world without a backward glance. Jessica envied Emily in her own way. I wish I could be like that, maybe sometime in the future, but not now. Right now, I have to get a divorce, sell the apartment, split things. It's all so painful and unpleasant. I didn't think life could turn out like that. She thought, you can still turn it around, pretend you've forgiven. Go on living a measured, unhappy, but peaceful life. Not ready for change, though it often comes unexpectedly. While Emily dreamed of her happiness, Jessica pondered how loneliness was saved. At least she's got kids. And here she was, lonely. Speaking of children, oh my God, where's Mary? Jessica exclaimed fearfully and hurried into the room. Mary was asleep, tired after a long day. Jessica, did you feed her today? Emily inquired. No, you didn't, Jessica smiled. She was the one who gave me tea and brought me sandwiches, keeping an eye on me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. Strange, with a mom like that and a nomadic life. Mary is a perfectly adequate child, Jessica reasoned, and now her mom will probably have to go into rehab. What's going to happen to Mary? No one seems to take much interest in her fate. Yeah, it's weird, Emily agreed. We should get going. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number. Girlfriend, can you pick me up at Jessica's? Thanks. Emily sent the photo and smiled at the response. What tenderness. God, well, at least you be happy. The next morning, Mr. Lawrence himself called Jessica. He invited, or rather announced, that he was expecting her for lunch, and the car would arrive at the appointed time. Jessica felt anxious. It was clear what the conversation would be about. Or rather, about whom? About whom? About Mary. Jessica thought that now her daughter would be discussed, and she herself meant nothing to Lawrence. It was sad to part with the girl who had been such a comfort to her during the last few days. But her feelings were apparently unimportant. The meeting took place again in a restaurant, where a polite waiter again greeted them and Lawrence, who had aged noticeably during these days. Hello, Jessica. It's good to see you. You won't believe this, but in the last few days, you are the first person I've had a pleasant conversation with. The others are either sympathetic or mean. Michael, may I ask how Samantha is doing? Jessica asked hesitantly. Michael told her that after Michael left, he went to Samantha's house. He found her in a semi-conscious state and called an ambulance. The doctors were clear. Very severe poisoning, needing sophisticated equipment and round-the-clock care that couldn't be provided at home. Michael experienced déjà vu, remembering the past and wondering why he was involved in this story again. The ex-wife, who had left him decades ago, was once again affecting his life. He reproached himself. What nonsense, Michael, still hoping? She's sick. Even after recovery, she'll never be the girl you knew. But he couldn't let Samantha die alone. He knew that no amount of treatment was a guarantee, but he couldn't abandon her. Jessica looked at Michael Lawrence, feeling how hard it was for him to even utter those words. You can't decide how to tell her you're her daddy because you're afraid you won't impress her. I think Mary would be happy to know she has a real father who wants to see her and be there for her. I only spent a few days with her, but I sensed how much she needed someone of her own, someone close to her. And the fact that you can be there for her is already more than most people can offer. Jessica sensed how much Michael needed those words, confirmation that he could be a good father to his daughter despite all his past mistakes. Maybe I don't have the right to say this, but I'm scared of losing Mary. She's become someone very close to me, and I don't want her to disappear from my life. Maybe I could see her once in a while. Take a walk in the park, go to a cafe, maybe the zoo. I understand if you're against it, but she's become a part of my life, Jessica said quietly, feeling how important it was for her not to lose touch with the girl. Michael listened, nodding thoughtfully. Jessica, I can see that my daughter has grown attached to you, and I think she'll be only too happy to spend time with you. But first, I want to mend our relationship, show her that I'm her father. After that, I'd love it if you could keep seeing each other. At home, Jessica already had Michael waiting for her, and the atmosphere was tense. We need to talk, he said, frantically pulling on his jacket and trying to appear calm. But Jessica deferred the conversation until she met Mary, who was waiting downstairs for Uncle Michael. You remember Uncle Michael, don't you? You used to visit him when you were little. Your mom used to leave you at his place. Will you go to see him? Jessica asked gently. Do you want me to go? Am I boring you? Mary looked innocently at Jessica, her face reflecting fear and hope at the same time. No, it's not that, baby girl. It's just that your mom is sick, will be in the hospital for a long time. You're going to live with Uncle Michael. That's your real daddy. He really wants to be there for you and take care of you. Jessica tried to explain the situation as gently as possible, trying to hide her pain from the other. Mary stood in front of Jessica, her eyes shining with joy and tenderness. Jessica felt a moment of peace in her heart. This little person seemed to be able to weave all the pieces of her broken heart back together. You mean a lot to me, Mary, Jessica said quietly, and I'm so glad you have a daddy who loves you very much, and that we'll be able to see each other. That makes me incredibly happy. Mary's confession that Michael was her daddy was so pure and simple that Jessica's pain instantly dissipated, leaving only a smile on her face. And that's our little secret, Jessica smiled back, kissing Mary on the top of her head. She promised herself that she would keep this little happiness going as best she could, the desire for a better life, the determination to stand up for her happiness. It all made sense when Jessica held Mary's hand, feeling her endless trust and love. And even though the road ahead was not an easy one, in that moment Jessica knew she could overcome all challenges. She knew that life was full of surprises, but now she had a new purpose, to share those surprises with the people she loved, to find moments of joy even where there seemed to be none. And Mary's laughter was a bright ray of light on her path.